Okay, let's get started. So thanks to you all for coming tonight. I must say I had a number of requests when I got back from the conference in San Diego. There were a couple of clients who said to me, wow, love to hear about what you learned, what went on there. But I must say I wasn't really expecting the huge response that I got. There were a couple of hundred people who have either signed up to join in tonight live or to receive the recording, and of course some people nominated both, which is fine. You will receive the recording afterward, by the way. So if you want to be able to just focus on what I'm presenting and not have to scribble down notes, I'd really encourage you to do that. Sit back, relax, know that you'll be able to watch the recording later on. You'll get the slideshow as a PDF, so you're not going to miss out on anything. I'd rather you just give the presentation your full attention rather than feeling like you have to, desperately write down everything that's said, because you won't be able to hear it later on. Okay, so just a couple of housekeeping issues before we get started. I have got everyone on mute, and that's just to preserve the quality of the recording, so that you are, not distracted by the noises that are going on in people's backgrounds. If you have a question, I'd really encourage you to use the chat box. So you'll see the little control panel on the right of your screen. If a question pops up at any stage, just type it in. I have a lot to cover in this presentation, a lot. I mean, this conference was jam-packed. It was, I was joking with some of the other participants, it was like a boot camp. The first lecture was at 8:30 in the morning. We had 3 sessions before lunch, and then break for lunch, and then back afterward, another 3 sessions, like hour-long sessions, and then there was even a session after dinner. So it was really full tilt. I'm going to sum it up as best I can. But I do have a lot of material to cover, and so it's just going to be important that I leave the questions until the end. So type your questions in the chat box. If you have a mic, like a separate mic for your device, I will be able to unmute you at the end if you have a question that you want to ask in person. You can only do this if you have an external mic. Otherwise, the sound quality is too poor and there's a lot of feedback. And that just wrecks it for everyone. Okay, let's get started. So most of you already know me, but there are quite a few names that I don't recognize, people who've been referred to this presentation perhaps by others or by various Facebook groups that it was promoted in. So I just wanted to give you a quick rundown on who I am. My name's Robin Shooter. I am a naturopath and nutritionist. That's kind of my job description. I'm also a counsellor and an EFT and matrix reimprinting practitioner. If you've never heard of those last 2 things, don't worry. The naturopath and nutritionist that's the hat I wear to educate people about what they need to do to get healthy, and the EFT and matrix reimprinting hat is the one I wear when people are having trouble implementing that knowledge. So the EFT and matrix reimprinting are what help you change when you know what you need to do and you're not doing it anyway. I've been in practice since 1995. That's nearly 20 years. I'm feeling kind of old when I think about this. But from very early on in my practice, I gravitated toward treating conditions that are, sorry, I shouldn't use the word treating, it has legal ramifications. I work with people who have medically incurable conditions that have been diagnosed and the person's been told you've got to be on medication for this for the rest of your life. And the really interesting thing is that with a whole food, plant-based, nutritarian diet, many of these people can stop taking their medications and make a complete recovery. And attending the conference in San Diego was, I guess it was partly a confirmation of what I've been doing. I mean, the people who were presenting there are really just the top researchers in the world around plant-based nutrition. But it was also an opportunity for me to really refine my practice. I have 2 kids, aged 13 and 9. They've also been raised on a whole food plant-based diet, and their phenomenal good health is really a testimony to how well this method or system of eating and nourishing yourself works. It's not just, and I hope that no one waits, although lots of people do, but I hope that fewer and fewer people will be waiting until they get a chronic disease before they switch to a whole food plant-based diet. I hope that a lot more people are going to recognize this is the way to prevent disease, enjoy life a whole lot more. So without further ado, let's kick this off. So the second International Plant-Based Nutrition Healthcare Conference, which is a mouthful of a title, something that a lot of attendees were having a laugh about, was held in San Diego, California last month. And there were over 400 participants from 15 different countries, including countries that really made my eyes pop. You know, there were representatives there from Indonesia. There was a guy from the United Arab Emirates, and I was thinking, man, I thought I had a hard time promoting plant-based nutrition in Australia. What's he up for when he heads back home? So it was great. It was lovely to meet all these people, and of course have the benefit of learning from the collective wisdom of the faculty. And those of you who know a little bit about plant-based nutrition, you're going to see some familiar faces here. So over here we have, of course, T. Colin Campbell, the legend in this field who really kicked off the whole plant-based whole food movement with his book, The China Study. This is his son, Tom. We have Caldwell Esselstyn, famous for reversing heart disease, the inimitable Michael Greger of Nutrition Facts, John McDougall, very early hero of mine, Michael Clapper, Dean Ornish, who's just doing amazing work. Some of these faces you won't be familiar with, and I'll be introducing you to them as we go along. And they're all just amazing people doing incredible work. And it didn't hurt, of course, that the conference venue was really nice. So this is the view from the main conference room across Coronado Bay in San Diego. That's the view from my hotel room. And I'm told over here, if you can just see where my mouse is pointing, that's Mexico. So it's kind of like right across the border. Beautiful venue. All the food was provided, which was great, because one thing that does put me off about travel is that stress about how am I going to get healthy food. So it was wonderful to have these beautiful meals, really well presented, and to know that, you know, I could eat as much as I liked and enjoy and not have the worry about, you know, what the heck am I eating. The conference kicked off on the first night with a keynote presentation by Scott Stoll, and he was one of the faculty whom I hadn't encountered before. He's an MD. I've included the details of his practice for those who would like a bit more info on him. He's a lovely, lovely, beautiful guy. He was a former Winter Olympian, a member of the US bobsled team, and he specialises in regeneration and restoration of ancient tissue through various non-surgical treatments, and quite an interesting practice. And he began the he did the keynote, as I mentioned, and he began with this video. I'm just going to let you watch this. Just imagine, you know, 400 attendees, and this is what we saw. Okay, I'm just going to put myself on mute so you can enjoy this. Just a couple of minutes. Actually, I'm just going to make sure, if you can hear the soundtrack, just type in the speaker in the chat box for me. Drat. So what I'm picking up here is there's actually no sound on this, and I really do apologise for that. This was one of the tech issues that I thought I had sorted. So I'm going to quickly summarise this, and I will send you a link to this video because I'd love you to see it. It's only, as you can see, about 6 minutes long. So here's a quick version of this. This is St. Joseph's Hospital in Ann Arbor, a little town, actually quite a big town, I understand, in Michigan. It's a hospital in the Catholic system, and what they did was that they had quite extensive grounds. It was all you know, like big lawn grounds that the hospital was set in, and they ripped up some of the lawns. I'm just going to kind of scroll through this so you can see, and they converted some of the grounds into a garden, greenhouse, growing lots of vegetables and a few fruits, and they started using the produce that they produced in this garden in the kitchen. So let's just scroll through and see if we can get to that bit. Some of the patients who are doing rehab, for example, for strokes, they actually go and work the gardens, and then the produce ends up in the kitchen, and also in that they run a market garden in the hospital grounds, so they sell the excess produce there. And the dietitians have got involved. They're involved in the food service planning. As I mentioned, there's one of the dietitians. So she's now, I'm sorry, she's, yeah, no, she's a dietitian. She's RD there. So she's, rather than, you know, the patients meeting her in the hospital rooms now, they're meeting her in the hospital's garden, which is just phenomenal. So these are some of the meals that they're producing with beautiful fresh produce. Does this look like the slop you've seen hospitals serve up? Oh, golly gee. So serving up this beautiful, healthy food. They've got the whole hospital team on board. The community, of course, is really benefiting. The patients are going to get better a whole lot faster eating food like this. And of course, people who come to the hospital to visit their sick relatives and so forth are getting this message that food is a big part of the solution to health problems. So, as I say, I will send you a link to this, or you can even just, you know, go into YouTube and search for the farm at St Joseph Mercy Hospital. It was just, you know, really gobsmacking, and you could, you know, I mean, just imagine over 400 people. A lot of them doctors are just judging, you know, my rough straw poll based on the credentials that I saw on people's conference tags. About half of the attendees were doctors. They were MDs, and many of them were quite new to the practice of plant-based nutrition. So you can just imagine, you know, here's our first night together, and we're watching this transformative experience where this hospital has really taken the focus off sick care and put it on to health care. There's the farmers market in the hospital grounds. Just really amazing stuff. Totally encourage you to watch this video and enjoy this. It's just great. So I'm so sorry we couldn't get sound. I'm not quite sure why that is. It's coming through on my headphones, but not on yours. So, okay, let's move along. And the first full day of the conference kicked off with Michael Greger. If you are not already a subscriber to Michael Greger's website, nutritionfacts.org, get on there. It's completely free. I really would encourage you to make a donation. This guy does all of his work for free. He gets no money out of this website. He produces DVDs every year, which are summaries of his presentations, and he gives them away. He gave away a stack of them at the conference, just gives them away. It's amazing. So you can watch this whole presentation that he gave at the conference for free at this location. So don't go and do that now. Do it later on. Pay attention to me. And these were so the presentation this year, every year has a different theme. And this year's theme was about causes of disability. So causes of disability are measured by, or they're sort of described by the acronym DALY, D-A-L-Y, and that stands for Disability Adjusted Life Use. So this is a measure of how much various disabling diseases are affecting people, either reducing their lifespan or reducing their active lifespan in which they can participate in the normal activities of life. So the first major cause of disability, and this, by the way, was an international study, so across the world, it's angina, that crippling, crushing chest pain that occurs on exertion, and that's related to, obviously, cardiovascular disease. And so one of the interesting findings presented was that angina was reduced by 91% by Dr. Dean Ornish's program, and Ornish, of course, was also a speaker at the conference. So his program incorporates a low-fat plant-based diet, moderate exercise, relaxation, meditation practices, and also social support, which consists of regular support group meetings, so, you know, face-to-face contact. The application of his program is called the Multi-Site Cardiac Lifestyle Intervention Program. So this was one of the major studies, and what they found was that within 12 weeks, 3 months in other words, nearly 3/4 of angina patients were completely free of symptoms. and a further 9% moved from the limiting category of angina, in other words, it was really limiting their daily activities, to the mild category, which means, if they ran for the bus, they might get an attack, but otherwise they were doing just fine. They also found that high-protein diets, those very popular high-protein diets that everyone's blogging about and the personal trainers are recommending, they dramatically reduce blood flow to the heart. And this shows you how much. So up the top here, you can see, now the red indicates good blood flow to the heart muscle, and the green, of course, is poor blood flow. So the two pictures up the top here are before and after a low-fat diet. So here's before, here's after. You see that heart muscle's receiving a whole lot more blood. This is before a high-protein diet, and this is after a high-protein diet. You can see these whole, chunks of heart muscle that are just not getting adequate blood supply. So this is what, unfortunately, awaits these people who are jumping on the high-protein diet bandwagon. And they won't notice the decrease in blood flow if they're young and fit. They're going to have enough cardiac reserve that it won't really have an impact on them. As they get older, they're really going to suffer because of the adoption of these high-protein diets. They're really lining themselves up for cardiac disease, angina, and, of course, coronary heart disease. So there were some really interesting case reports. This was one of my favourites. This was a man, from, if memory serves, this was a case in England. Yeah, it was, because you can see they use the same cholesterol measures as us. So this was a guy who had to stop walking every 9 or 10 paces. That's how crippling his angina was. And within just 5 months after adopting his vegan diet, which he adopted here in February 1964. So as you can see, this is a fairly old case report. This stuff isn't new, and that's what's very disturbing, that, this has been known for decades, that a plant-based diet leads to dramatic improvements in people's heart disease symptoms and obviously in their outcomes, and yet it's not being promoted. So I love this bit. August 1964, he went on holidays in the Lake District and he was climbing mountains, having been crippled by his angina, back in February. Now, of course, Michael Greger loves to contrast this with what drugs have to offer. So the U-But new angina drug, ranolazine, whose brand name is Ranexa, and this was declared a great success because angina patients taking it were able to exercise a whopping 33.5 seconds longer on the treadmill before they had to stop because their angina was crippling them. And for that wonderful benefit, that'll cost you $2,000 a year to take. So what would you rather do? Get 33.5 more seconds on the treadmill or go climb mountains? They're the choices. It's pretty stark. Low back pain was the next in the list of disabling conditions. And we're talking chronic non-specific back pain here, which means back pain that isn't related to a tumour or an accident or some other obvious cause. This is just that, that chronic disabling low back pain that no one can, until now, no one can track down in terms of the cause. It's very widespread. It's about 23% of the population, and again, these are worldwide figures, who will suffer chronic low back pain at some time in their lives. And somewhere around 12% are actually disabled by it, so they're unable to work or work normally. What's really frightening is the prevalence of chronic low back pain is increasing in children and teenagers. And in case you were thinking, oh, that's because they carry heavy backpacks these days, that hasn't changed. People aren't actually carrying any heavier loads. In fact, they're doing less physical work and less carrying of things. And the cause is atherosclerosis. So the same pathology that causes angina, that crippling, crushing chest pain, also causes lower back pain because you get this atherosclerosis or blockage by cholesterol-laden plaque of the arteries that feed the lumbar spine. So what they found is that if you have a narrowed vertebral artery, that is arteries that are blocked by plaque, by cholesterol-laden plaque, you're actually 8.5 times as likely to suffer chronic low back pain at some point in your life. So there's a direct correlation. Furthermore, if you have chronic low back pain, that's actually a really powerful predictor that you will die from a heart attack. So, fairly obviously, if you've got clogging of your vertebral arteries, then the chances are very, very high that your coronary arteries are blocked too. So if you do have yourself, or you know someone who's got that chronic low back pain and it's not because of injury or a tumor or anything like that, clean up your diet. Encourage them to clean up their diet. Not only are they less likely to have a heart attack, but I mean, you're just going to get yourself out of pain, which is an amazingly good thing, because pain is so disabling and really decreases your ability to enjoy life. The next major cause of disability is stroke, and if you know of someone who suffered a stroke, you know how devastating this condition is. My stepfather, who unfortunately has really terribly dreadful eating habits, has had a number of strokes, and I've watched my mother's life just being completely turned upside down by this. It's an awful thing to have a stroke, and it's a pretty awful thing to live with someone who has had a stroke and can't communicate and can't do their normal daily activities, and therefore becomes depressed. And yeah, frankly, it sucks. You don't want to have a stroke. So just 7 grams more of dietary fibre per day leads to a reduced risk of stroke of 7%. That's pretty impressive. 7 grams of fibre isn't that much. You can easily get this. And of course, the more dietary fibre you eat, the lower your stroke risk drops. So some of you might have seen the Catalyst program on the ABC. It was on I think it was in August, and it was a program about gut bacteria and fibre, and how basically people need to eat a higher fibre diet. It was a 2-part series, and what really knocked my socks off was that in 2 entire programs, not once did they mention the fact that the only place you get dietary fibre is from plants, which I found quite a stunning omission, and I couldn't help but think it was a deliberate omission. So when they talk about eating more dietary fibre, what they mean is eat more plants, and don't eat them as Oreo cookies. You eat them as whole plant foods, whole minimally processed foods. That's where you get your fibre. And of course, if you do that, you're also going to help prevent the next major cause of disability, which is type 2 diabetes. It's entirely preventable by a whole food plant-based diet. And I'll go through some facts and figures on that a little bit later on when we get to Scott Stoll's presentation. But the long and the short of it is that a whole food plant-based diet has actually been shown to be better at preventing diabetes in people who have pre-diabetes or insulin resistance than metformin, which is the standard diabetes drug. So you'll do better if you change your diet than if you take the drug. And if you already have diabetes, well, you're not left out in the cold, because a whole food plant-based diet also reverses many of the most feared complications of diabetes, including neuropathy, which is this awful nerve pain that causes burning sensations and numbness and tingling, and also retinopathy, which is a diabetic eye disease, and that is one of the major causes of blindness in adults. So this study was just absolutely stunning. They took 21 diabetic patients who had severe neuropathy. This was a sharp, burning nerve pain. And 17 out of them, after adopting a low-fat, high-fibre, completely vegan diet, had just total relief from their neuropathy. And it took between 4 and 16 days. Now, these are people who had been diabetic for years, and many of them had been suffering neuropathy for years, out of pain in about 2 weeks. Now, that's a big deal for anyone. It's particularly a big deal because there's no medication that's ever been found to effectively treat diabetic neuropathy. So plants beat pills, hands down. There's just no competition. 5 out of these 21 patients were able to get off all their medications after 2 weeks. And again, these were long-term diabetics. They weren't newly diagnosed. They were long-term diabetics. Half of them who are on insulin. There is a subset of type 2 diabetics for whom medications stop working eventually and they have to go on insulin. Half of those who are on insulin dropped their dose. And of those who are on high blood pressure medication, the need for that decreased by 80%, and that was after only 3 weeks. These are amazing findings. Why doesn't every GP and every endocrinologist treating diabetes know about this? There was a really interesting case report of a woman who had advanced diabetic retinopathy to the point where she was legally blind in one eye, and she actually reversed that blindness by adopting a whole food plant-based diet. Really stunning stuff. So Alzheimer's disease is the next major cause of disability. This Alzheimer's disease is actually catching up with heart disease and cancer as a leading cause of death in Australia too. So certainly it causes a severe reduction in quality of life and increasingly a reduction in length of life. So what's important to understand is that it's not just something that happens as you get older. That's not it with Alzheimer's disease. It's a disease. It's a brain disease that's caused by atherosclerosis of the arteries that feed the brain. So you get angina or coronary heart disease if you have atherosclerosis in the arteries that feed the heart. You get chronic low back pain if you have atherosclerosis in the arteries that feed the lumbar spine, as we'll be discussing later on. You get erectile dysfunction if you have atherosclerosis in the arteries that feed the penis, but also the clitoris. And you get Alzheimer's disease if you have atherosclerosis in the arteries that feed your brain. Now, the primary driver of Alzheimer's disease is a high intake of saturated fat and cholesterol, so it has the same risk factors as heart disease, not surprisingly. What's interesting is there's a particular kind of like a gene mutation called the ApoE4 allele, and it's known to increase the risk of Alzheimer's disease. The black population of Nigeria has the highest reported frequency in the world of this particular gene, but interestingly, they have one of the lowest rates of Alzheimer's disease. So that's curious. Why would that be? Well, it turns out that they have a very low average cholesterol level. And of course, that's mainly because of how they eat. So they eat hardly any animal fat. It's a whole food plant-based diet and a very high carbohydrate diet, low fat, high carbohydrate diet. And that kind of controls the expression of this, if you like, mutant gene, which protects them against the Alzheimer's. Now, of course, if they move to the US and start eating the American diet, they get Alzheimer's like it's going out of style. But as long as they stay on their traditional diet of plant foods, they have very low rates of Alzheimer's. In general, eating meat, and this includes white meat, you don't get off the hook if you cut out the red meat and you just eat chicken and turkey and fish instead. Still a 2 to 3 times higher risk of developing dementia if you eat any muscle meats at all. And of course, there's been very sadly a great increase in Alzheimer's prevalence in Japan. So Japan was traditionally one of those countries that had very low rates of cardiovascular disease and all the associated pathologies. Their rates of Alzheimer's are just skyrocketing, and the strongest correlation between this increased rate of Alzheimer's and any dietary factor has been found to be quite simply the consumption of animal fat, which has gone through the roof since the American occupation of Japan after the Second World War. Those of you who've read books like Wheat Belly by Bill Davis and Grain Brain by Daniel Perlmutter, I get a lot of clients coming to see me and saying, aren't grains bad? Shouldn't I cut out grains? I've read things about grains. I find it, rather curious that this William Davis, who wrote Wheat Belly, is actually fat. Now, I'm not getting into fat shaming here, but hey, if you write a book that blames grains on being fat, it's kind of bad for your credibility if you're lugging around a big fat tub on you. So I'll cover the whole, legume, grain and weight thing later on, but just focusing on Daniel Perlmutter's assertion, which is that there's something brain toxic in grains. There's absolutely no evidence for this. Grain consumption and legume consumption has actually been found to be inversely associated with the risk of Alzheimer's disease. In other words, the more legumes and whole grains people eat, the lower the risk that they will develop Alzheimer's. So, nothing wrong with whole grains. Obviously, if you have celiac disease or you're gluten sensitive, then stay away from gluten-containing grains, but there's nothing wrong with any other grains. And of course, if you don't have celiac, then eat as much wheat as you like. It's not a problem. Bowel cancer was the next major cause of years of life lost or impaired by disability. Of course, does anyone not know that the risk of bowel cancer is strongly linked with consumption of meat? Honestly, you'd have to be living under a rock not to have heard this, although apparently a lot of doctors have been. Processed meats such as ham and mortadella and hot dogs and salamis carry the strongest risk. And this is largely because the nitrates that are used in the curing process. So curing is just this process that turns the meat pink, because people don't want to really eat it like a grey hot dog. It doesn't look so good. But unfortunately, these nitrates are transformed into compounds called nitrosamines, and they damage the DNA in the cells lining the wall of the bowel, and that damage can then, over years lead to bowel cancer. Again, white meats don't get you off the hook here, so processed white meats like chicken loaf are also associated with a higher risk of bowel cancer. Really, it's safer just to avoid red and white meat if you don't want to get bowel cancer. Breast cancer, another of these major causes of disability, strong link between breast cancer and constipation. So Michael Greger kind of amusingly called women who have these 3 or more bowel movements a day, his little term of endearment for them is super poopers. And super poopers have a 46% lower risk of breast cancer. So if you go less than once a day, you've got a nearly half as much risk again of developing breast cancer as a woman who does a sort of, morning, noon and night kind of bowel movement thing. And of course, the women who are going that frequently, assuming they don't have some kind of inflammatory bowel disease or irritable bowel syndrome, they go that frequently because they're eating fibre. I mean, isn't that obvious? They're eating whole plant foods, they're eating a high fibre diet, and that causes bulking of the stool. Now, the mechanism of this is really interesting. If you are constipated, so you're not emptying your bowels on a regular basis, there's an increase in toxic bile acids. They start to accumulate in the colon. Just remember that bile is the liver's method of self-cleansing. So the liver produces bile as a way of kind of washing out all the toxins that it's in contact with and that it metabolizes. It concentrates them in bile. The bile is stored in the gallbladder. When you eat food that contains fat, the bile is ejected into the small intestine, and it helps to emulsify fats, which is a good thing. You get to absorb your fat-soluble vitamins, and then the bile heads on down through the small intestine, through the large intestine, and out through out the other end in the form of a bowel movement. If your bowel movements are kind of backing up in there, that means that those bile acids, which are pretty toxic things, they're in contact with the wall of the bowel for a much longer period than if you're going more frequently. So this increase in toxic bile acids leads to these bile acids being absorbed across the wall of the colon and into the bloodstream. And it turns out that they're taken up by breast fluid, and they're actually concentrated in breast fluid. So breast fluid is kind of like a filtrate of blood. It's the plasma content of the blood without the red blood cells, and it bathes the cells of the breast. And these toxic bile acids can become up to 100 times more concentrated in the breast fluid than in the bloodstream. And this high concentration of toxic bile acids causes mutations in the DNA of breast cells. And again, just as with the colon, these can lead on to breast cancer. So that's the mechanism by which constipation increases the breast cancer risk. It's been found that vegans, again, not surprisingly, they have dramatically lower levels of toxic bile acids in their colon and in their bowel movements. And the reason for this is that many of these toxic bile acids are produced as a result of metabolizing animal protein. But also, of course, vegans have a lot more fiber, so their bowel movements are bigger and they have them more often, which means there's a decreased concentration of toxic bile acids in their bowel movements. The meat industry's response to the publication of all these worrying findings was really interesting, and Michael Greger had a little snippet from a journal called Meat Science, which sounds like a good fun read. And so the meat industry's response was basically to employ the same techniques as the tobacco industry employed when it started to become blindingly obvious that smoking cigarettes was really bad for your health. And specifically, they encourage those promoting meat consumption to make this comparison, to say, oh well, eating meat. Some people say eating meat is harmful for your health, but hey, compare it to tobacco smoking. It's not as bad as that. I mean, honestly, if you have to compare your product to cigarettes to make it look good, you're in trouble. I mean, really, folks, that's like scraping the bottom of the barrel there. They also, one of their other intentional tactics is to exploit these schisms, these disagreements between the various groups that are promoting, no meat or low meat or less meat or whatever, to create a climate of doubt. If you've ever read the book Merchants of Doubt, which is about how the fossil fuel industries and other other big businesses create a climate of doubt in the public mind about climate change. These are the same tactics that are being used. So, all of these industries, chemical industry, tobacco industry, food industry, they create this climate of doubt. They say, oh, well, scientists disagree about whether it's safe. They buy researchers, pretty easy to buy apparently. They come pretty cheap. They infiltrate universities. They set up paid chairs so that a professor will gain tenure directly through essentially sponsorship that's paid by a particular company. And of course they infiltrate boards of various corporations and not-for-profits. They infiltrate the media. They of course buy advertising space in media too, which makes media outlets very unwilling to criticise them, and they infiltrate legislative agencies. So it's the same tactics that are being used by all of these industries. The American Dietetic Association, which has now been renamed as the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, this is one of the examples of how the meat industry infiltrates organisations. So this is the professional group, if you like, the trade group for dietitians in the United States. And they accept, in fact, they promote these fact sheets. So they go to food industries and they say, give us $20,000 and we'll allow you to essentially ghostwrite a fact sheet about your products, which gives them a clean bill of health. And then we, as an organisation of dietitians, will go out there and promote these fact sheets which say that drinking soft drinks is fine. Here are some of their customers. The Hershey Centre for Health and Nutrition. Is that like the Pond's Institute? Hershey, so yeah, obviously Hershey's chocolate bars, in case you missed the reference. Wendy's, good old Wendy's, the ice cream company. The Egg Nutrition Centre, gee, I bet they're fair and balanced. The Distilled Spirits Council, they obviously sell alcohol. The Wrigley Science Institute, oh, you got to love a chewing gum company that sets up the Wrigley Science Institute. And of course, all the usual culprits, Coca-Cola and Pepsi and McDonald's. So these are some of the organisations that have partnered with the American Dietetic Association and that are and they're paying the ADA or the A&D now to promote their products, which is just outrageous. It's not quite as blatant here in Australia, but there is strong sponsorship of the dietitians' professional associations and their conferences and so forth by the food industry, specifically by the junk food industry. I love this quote, and that's Michael Greger in action. He's just, if you ever have watched his videos online, he's just like that in public. In person, I should say. I had the great privilege of he was on my table at breakfast on the last day, so I got to have a good chat with him, and he's just the funniest guy. He's really awesome. Totally love him. The best kept secret in medicine is that given the right milieu or the right environment, which is of course what we provide, the body heals itself. And that's, a pretty stunning thing to think about, really. Your body will just fix itself. It knows how to do that. You've just got to get out of its way. Okay, the next presentation on day one was by John McDougall, who has been a great hero of mine for many, many years. Back when I was in naturopathic college, I read his books like the McDougall Program and McDougall's Medicine, A Challenging Second Opinion. He really set me on the path to be a lifestyle-oriented practitioner rather than the kind of pills and potion practitioner that I was being trained to be. And I love the fact that at age 67, he's just as passionate as ever. This is him on stage down the bottom here, and he just, had the whole room in the palm of his hand. He was brilliant. So his presentation was his latest, which he calls the colour picture book on food poisoning and how to cure it. And I'd encourage you to just go to his website, grab that book, and it's done very simply. It's been translated into a whole lot of different languages. Share it with everyone you know. So by food poisoning, of course, he doesn't mean, getting the runs from bad chicken. He's talking about food poisoning as in being slowly poisoned by the food that we eat, and he posits that food poisoning is the cause of all of these major chronic diseases which are crippling people and crippling health budget. And as I say, I mean, you can download the document and read it. It's very simple. he often repeats this central idea that people in westernized societies are suffering en masse the diseases that formerly were only suffered by rich people. So if you look at old paintings of rich people, you know, he's the guy with his feet up on the footstool. He's suffering from gout, you know, from the alcohol and all the rich food that he eats. And, you know, this one over here, I think he's got some kind of wasting disorder. But so all of these diseases like obesity, actually he would have been a sufferer of congestive heart failure, come to think of it. So all of these conditions that the peasants could not, did not ever develop because of the kind of food that they were eating. Only the rich developed them in those days. And now we're seeing these diseases like obesity, heart disease, gout and diabetes because people are now have free access to foods that formerly were only affordable by the rich. John McDougall's very big on this whole concept of moderation. So the idea that you can just eat a moderate diet. He says, look, it doesn't work. It doesn't work when you've got life-destroying habits. And he compares it to cigarette smoking. You know, you never met a smoker who quit by cutting down. You just have to say, that's it, I'm not smoking anymore. You never met an alcoholic who said, look, I'm no good on whiskey, but, you know, I think I'll be okay on beer. If you're an alcoholic, you've got to get off the booze. That's all there is to it. So if you are suffering the effects of food poisoning, you've got to treat it as you would drug addiction, which is just stop. Just say no. Get those foods off the menu. Now, Dr. McDougall promotes a starch-based diet where starches are, you know, the absolute centerpiece with between 1 and 4 pieces of fruit a day. And he sees the non-starchy vegetables as being more, you know, for a bit of interest in color. He points out that starches are the caloric engines of human civilization. So you can see here, hopefully this text is big enough for you to read. But throughout the world, you know, all the major civilizations throughout the period in which humans can be said to be civilized, all of those civilizations have relied on plant foods. So corn, potatoes, legumes, sweet potatoes, all of these grains and starch vegetables have been, you know, the centerpiece of people's diets. In his diet, he I wouldn't say outlaws, but he strongly recommends against people eating animal products and oils and any added oils and fats, and also limiting fat-rich foods and dried fruits unless you're underweight. Another interesting point that he made is that the field of distance running, you know, marathons and so forth, has been dominated by the Kenyans and Nigerians since the 1960s, and you know, these are people who are carb loading, if you like, by eating their natural historic plant-based diet. Just as I suppose a side note, and you'll find this when you read different doctors and other authorities, you know, other experts in the field of plant-based nutrition, there are some divergent opinions. So I personally don't find that this really starch-centered diet that Dr. McDougall promotes, I don't find that works very well for me. My body takes better to a diet that has a lot of non-starchy vegetables and lesser amounts of starches. But you've got to say, this guy has an amazing track record when it comes to reversing all sorts of chronic diseases. And I know that, you know, in fact, one of my clients who very happily adopted a more nutritarian diet, as in a more Joel Furman type diet, she did great on that. Her husband wouldn't have a bar of it, but when he saw the McDougall program and you know, got carte blanche to eat as many potatoes as he liked, he was right on it, and it had amazing effects. He lost, I think he lost about 20 kilos, dropped his cholesterol like a rock. He's just doing great. So don't be upset or put off by the slight differences of opinion between the various doctors advocating whole food plant-based diets. You can tweak it and experiment with the different versions of it and find the one that's right for you. Okay, next presentation was by Doug Lisle, and I've been reading Doug Lisle's books and, you know, following his articles online, watching his lectures for years. In fact, you can watch a very similar presentation to the one that he gave at the conference on YouTube. And what I love about Doug Lisle, he's a psychologist. He's got a very dry, droll sense of humour. He does this sort of self-deprecating shtick, I suppose, where he talks about how his dad, you know, didn't encourage his artistic talents. And then he proceeds to do this slideshow, which is all these like really abominably hand-drawn sketches. But it's great. It's really funny. Go watch the presentation if you haven't seen Doug Lyle in action. He's just brilliant. And the central thesis is that all animal behaviour is guided by these neural circuits. So neurons, of course, being brain cells, they're arranged in these circuits. And these circuits are evolved to maximise the survival chances and the reproduction chances of that individual. And of course, each species has neural circuits that have evolved over millennia, and they're completely fitted to the nature of that organism and to its environment. And so one of the major circuits is what he calls the motivational triad, and this essentially comprises the drive to maximise pleasure, so to get maximum enjoyment or maximum, pleasure response. So I'm just getting a message on the chat from Lorna and Andy that the sound is dropping out, and I'm wondering if anyone else is having that problem too. If you've got sound issues, if the sound is going a bit wonky, just type it in the chat box, and I might just do an audio reset and see if I can fix that problem. Okay, Romaine, you're getting that too. Kylie says it's okay now. Let's see if I can do a quick reset on the sound. Just give me a sec. Okay. All right, hopefully that is going to fix the sound problem. Oh, Paul, you were having the same problem. Not sure what that's about. Oh, some of you are getting no problems at all. Those of you who are getting audio problems, since it doesn't seem to be universal, sometimes it's a bandwidth issue, and you might just need to close any other applications that you've got running on your computer, especially if you've got your email or web browser open. So just go ahead and shut that down and see if that works. Okay, so the motivational triad consists of maximising pleasure, minimising pain or discomfort, and conserving energy. And these three drivers kind of shape the behaviour of all animals, including human beings. And the example that that Doug Lyle gives is, if you're a shark, one of the things that gives you pleasure is food. And in fact, pleasure is the ultimate goal of animals, and the major way that animals, including humans, in our ancestral environment at least, the major way that animals secure pleasure is getting hold of food and getting hold of sex. And of course, as he jokes, if you're a male, then your priority is getting sex, and then food comes second. He said that, not me. So all the guys who are feeling offended right now, blame him. He's a guy. So, of course, if you're a shark, one of the things that gives you pleasure is getting fish, and you're going to get the most pleasure if you get a really tasty fish, and if there are fish that are flopping around in the water right next to you, it makes more sense to go and eat them rather than swim, half a mile and eat the fish that's over in that direction, because you'll be conserving energy and maximising pleasure if you eat the fish that's right next to you. Okay, so that's pretty simple way of understanding human behaviour and other animal behaviour. There are, of course, more complexities to it. So, with pleasure we get this surge of dopamine, the neurotransmitter dopamine. But we also have this other neurotransmitter that's associated with happiness, and that's primarily a function of serotonin. And he describes the moods of happiness as a guidance system toward pleasure. So what happens is that there are, in most animal species, probably all animal species, there are some quite complex behaviour patterns that ultimately are directed toward attaining pleasure. But they involve the necessity to delay some gratification. So, the primary example here is courtship rituals. So, one of the ultimate pleasures in life, of course, is getting sex. But if you're a male animal, you often have to put on some kind of display. You either have to, do a dance, or you have to decorate your bower with blue objects if you're a lyrebird, or, some other thing that you do to attract the attention of females. And he gives the example of this bird called a shrike. I think it's a greater grey-headed shrike or something like that. And the courtship ritual for this animal is the male catches bugs and impales them on the thorns of trees in his territory. And then the females come around and they check out which guy's got the most stuff hanging off his tree, and then he gets sex. So, of course, it would maximise the male's pleasure if he just ate the damn bugs. I mean, he's gone out there and caught them. Why not just eat them? That will give him immediate pleasure. But he's thinking in his tiny little bird brain, I'd also like to get some sex. So rather than just eat the bug, he has this serotonin guidance system which kind of gives him a little doggy biscuit, a little surge of serotonin every time it catches a bug, and instead of eating it, he sticks it on a spike. So obviously the bird isn't, or we presume doesn't have a complex enough brain to say, this will get me sex. So instead he's guided by having the moods of happiness, having serotonin toward doing this behavior, you know, delaying his gratification so that ultimately he will get what he wants, which is this big dopamine surge that he'll have when he finally gets sex. Okay, so that's all very interesting. How does that relate to humans? How this relates is what Doug Lyle calls the dietary pleasure trap. So it's normal to derive some enjoyment from eating food. And if you see in this first sector here, the first of the 5 sectors, so this first one represents what happens when you eat, you know, a fairly sort of simple whole food plant-based diet. So imagine some tribe out in Africa or the rainforests of South America, and they've been eating, you know, plant-based diet, pretty simple stuff. And when they eat, they enjoy it. That's great. They get a normal pleasure serve. And then imagine some, you know, usually Americans come in and they say that they bring their food with them. So they bring chocolate bars and, you know, jars of and they bring ice cream and donuts, all these really rich foods. And then if people eat these foods, and wow, they get this huge dopamine hit because the elements of food that cause a dopamine surge are salt, sugar, fat. Right, so you start eating these really concentrated sources of those foods and wow, you get this big dopamine hit. And then if you keep eating those foods, what happens is you become neuroadapted, or the process is also known as habituation, which simply means getting used to something. So that high level of pleasure that you got from the chocolate and the ice cream and the chips, it actually diminishes over time. You become neuroadapted. You just get a kind of average, a normal amount of pleasure out of those foods. The problem arises when you decide, hey, you know, chips and ice cream and chocolate bars aren't doing me any good, I'm going to go eat healthy food. And of course, with that lowered concentration of sugar, salt and fat, you get a very diminished pleasure response. And so the pleasure trap refers to, you know, when you start making healthy changes, things that are good for you feel bad, and things that are bad for you feel good. So you get this big dopamine response to things that are really harming you, and you don't get a pleasure response to things that are good for you. The other point that he makes, of course, is that we now have reached a point in our society where we can buy or obtain all sorts of products and services that give us a dopamine hit but don't require us to do those, you know, goal-directed activities that would lead to serotonin and therefore happiness. So another element of the pleasure trap is we want to go straight for the pleasure, you know, straight for the big dopamine surge, but it ends up making us, number one, addicted, and number two, unhappy. So that's the essence of the pleasure trap. And of course, Doug Lyle's advice is hang in there. You know, you will, if you persist with healthy eating and regular exercise and all those other habits, you will start to come back up into this fifth zone here, which is where the healthy food starts tasting good and you enjoy it and you get that pleasure response back again. That's the essence of the pleasure trap. The next presentation was by Dean Ornish, who hopefully will need no introduction to you, but just in case you haven't heard of him, he's an amazing and pioneering medical doctor, and he's developed what he calls the Optimal Lifestyle Program. This is the one I kind of presaged before in talking about Michael Greger's presentation. So the program is nutrition, stress management, moderate exercise, and psychosocial support. I first read about Dean Ornish's work in his book, Dean Ornish's Program for Reversing Heart Disease, which I think was published in the late 80s, and it was a real game changer for me. So the essence of his program is it's not just lifestyle as prevention. You know, we hear a lot about, oh, well, you know, you should eat healthy and get exercise because it lowers your risk of disease. Well, it does more than that. It actually treats disease even once it's begun, and that's really exciting and really groundbreaking. So there's a real need for this approach because the limitations of all the high-tech approaches to so-called healthcare, which is actually disease care, are becoming better and better documented. And also, you know, on the flip side, so that, you know, the hazards of surgery and drugs, there's more and more evidence about just how dangerous they are. And on the flip side, there's more and more studies that show that intensive lifestyle changes give really good results, usually better results than the high-tech approaches. And of course, there have been changes in the US healthcare system which relate to reimbursement by diagnosis rather than procedure, which basically means that the US healthcare system, which is blowing out at a rate of knots, they're moving toward paying doctors not to do procedures, but paying them a certain amount. So if you treat a patient with this particular diagnosis, you get a fixed amount. Doesn't matter how you treat them. So there's a real incentive to treat them by lifestyle measures, which are a lot cheaper in the long run than by invasive surgery and other procedures. The Medicare system in the US, it's quite different to our Medicare, of course. It really only covers retired people and the really, people who can't be insured by the main insurance system, which I'll be discussing in a little while. And what's really interesting is that after years and years, Dean Ornish has actually got funding. So Medicare will now pay for people to do his program to reverse their heart disease, control their prostate cancer, and reverse their type 2 diabetes. This is really exciting stuff. So the lifestyle treatment addresses the cause of disease. I love this cartoon that he shared. So this is how medicine works, right? The tap's on, the sink's overflowing, and doctors are frantically mopping up the mess and mopping and mopping and mopping and mopping. Whereas lifestyle treatment, you go over there and you turn the taps off right there, so that no more water will be spilling out. So I think it's a really good visual on the difference between those two philosophies. And just to summarise some of the stats on the Ornish program for reversing heart disease, obviously angina frequency diminishes, 300% improvement in coronary blood flow measured by cardiac PET scans. Here's a picky for you. So up the top here you can see an angiogram. Here's a blockage in an artery that's caused by a cholesterol-laden plaque. And here's, so that's the before, and after the program you can see that artery is actually opened up. Down the bottom here we have a PET scan. So as before, the hot colours like orange and red indicate good blood flow to the heart. So this is before the program. This whole chunk of heart muscle is just not getting any blood. And here's after the program. These are really stunning results. Here's what happens to the actual diameter of the artery. So stenosis means blockage of the artery. So the control group, who were just assigned to usual care, which is just, go and see your doctor and follow his advice, you can see that arteries got more and more blocked over time, and in the Ornish group the arteries actually after 5 years were significantly less blocked, which is amazing. So this is like best treatment, best medical treatment. People get worse. Forget about the procedures and feed them healthy food and get them exercising, and they get better. Fabulous stuff. The same program that he developed to treat heart disease, he's also applying to early stage prostate cancer. So these are men who have quite a low grade prostate cancer, and they've been told that they can do watchful waiting, which means they just go and see their doctor regularly. They get their PSA tested, and if it starts going up, then they might have to have more interventions, drugs and surgery essentially. So this is what happened to the control group. The PSA went up over 12 months, and in Ornish's program the participants' PSAs went down. They also did this really interesting thing where they took serum, so that's the blood without the red blood cells, and they dripped it on prostate cancer cells that were growing in a petri dish. Now, any blood serum, when you drop it on cancer cells, will inhibit cancer cell growth to some degree. So you see that there was a 9% inhibition in the control patients, but in the serum of the men who were doing the Ornish program, this serum actually blocked the prostate cancer cell growth by 70%, which is just astonishing. They also found that whereas none of the men who were doing the Ornish program went on to surgery or drugs in that first year of treatment, 6 of the control patients did. So there's a really big difference in outcome. They also looked at the expression of various genes that are involved in cancer and found there are 501 genes. They did a gene swab before and after the program, so before and then 3 months into the program, and found there are 501 genes that affect cancer growth, and they were beneficially affected. And this was only after 3 months, which is really, really impressive stuff. They found also an increase in the enzyme telomerase. This is an enzyme that stops the breakdown of telomeres. So telomeres are often described as being like the little plastic caps on the ends of shoelaces that stop them being unraveled. And as your cells divide, those little protective caps get shorter and shorter and shorter. And it's believed that when we run out of telomeres, our cells stop replicating and then we die. So that's, like the end of our natural lifespan. So they found that the enzyme which restores these protective caps on the ends of DNA was increased by 30%, and again after 3 months. And also various angiogenesis factors, so these are factors that essentially drive the growth of tumours, were dramatically suppressed in men who are undertaking the Ornish program. Very similar results with type 2 diabetes, and this is particularly, this is a huge problem throughout the world, but in the US it's estimated that fully more than half of the US population will either have diabetes or be pre-diabetic in just 6 years' time, less than 6 years' time. Really scary in terms of the implications, because that's a $3.35 trillion projected cost to the US healthcare system. As I mentioned before, lifestyle changes beat out metformin at preventing development of diabetes, and in a trial of the Ornish program, they had 24 hospitals in various states participating, 329 patients. They found a dramatic drop in the HbA1c. This is a measure of how high the blood glucose level is. And, really that 7.3 to 6.5% drop, that's actually really significant for diabetics, because if you can get that HbA1c under 7, you prevent diabetic complications. So that was after, 12 weeks of treatment, and it dropped, well below that threshold for complications. Very impressive stuff. There's been a lot of misinformation about changes in not just the American diet, but Western diets generally. So we've been told that, we eat less fat than before and so forth. It actually isn't true. These are some of the major changes in the American diet. A lot more fat, a lot more sweeteners, 800 calories more on a daily basis per capita, which explains the obesity crisis, and a lot more meat. So that's what's been happening in the American diet. And of course it drives those three conditions that Ornish has been treating: diabetes, heart disease, and prostate cancer. A diet that's high in animal protein increases your risk of dying from any cause by 75%, which is pretty scary. If you want to look at cancer risk, it gets even worse. 400% greater risk of developing cancer if you eat a high animal protein diet, a la paleo style. And a 500% increase in diabetes, and significantly higher levels of this cancer-promoting hormone called IGF-1, which is also implicated in diabetes. And on the flip side, of course, there isn't a single study. There has never been a study done that showed that a low-carb, high-protein diet, such as those promoted by all those paleo aficionados out there, they don't have any research. They make all of these claims that carbohydrates are bad for you. They make you fat. They raise your insulin level. They affect your cholesterol badly, yada, yada, yada. And yet not a single one of them has ever been able to carry out and publish a study demonstrating that their approach works. And if their diet that they're promoting does not favourably affect heart disease risk, given that that's, if you combine cardiovascular disease and stroke, it's still the leading cause of death in Australia. Why would you take on a diet like that? Why would you eat that way if it doesn't protect you against the disease that is most likely to kill you, both men and women? What they found with these high-protein, low-carbohydrate diets is that they decrease the population of endothelial progenitor cells. Now, I'm going to cover endothelial cells in a bit more detail when we get to Cordell Esselstyn's presentation, but you need a lot more endothelial cells. So anything that diminishes their numbers and activates inflammation pathways and increases the clogging of your arteries is a bad thing. Okay, so when it comes to the high-tech intervention, stenting, of course, which is the insertion of this little metal ring inside an artery that's blocked off, there's just no evidence that it prevents death or non-fatal heart attacks, or that it has any benefit for angina. So it's a very expensive procedure. It carries a risk of death, and it doesn't work. Ditto for coronary bypass surgery. 1,212 people. It didn't prolong life. So you go through that incredibly invasive surgery. There's again, a very high risk of complications, and it doesn't actually work to give you any longer of a life. When it comes to prostate cancer, if you treat 49 men for prostate cancer, one of them will live longer. And all of those men are likely to develop urinary incontinence. They're likely to become impotent, so they have these huge diminishments in their quality of life, and only one of them will benefit from that treatment. This is nuts. So, yeah, the prevalence of erectile dysfunction nearly universal in men who had either their prostates removed or had radiation. It doesn't stack up. Dean Ornish is very big on the emotional drivers behind people changing their diet. So one of the things he said is, if you're feeling deprived, if that's the mindset that you have, I can't eat this food, I can't eat donuts, I feel deprived, that's not sustainable. When you get to the point where you can say, I'm choosing not to eat this because what I gain from not eating it is much more than what I give up, that's when you're at the point where these lifestyle changes are really sustainable. He also said something really interesting, which is that the major cause of premature death among doctors is suicide, and most doctors don't recommend going into medicine to their children. And I don't blame them. When you're seeing your patients get sicker and sicker and you never have the satisfaction of seeing dramatic recoveries, why wouldn't you be depressed to the point of suicide? So again, just coming back to motivations for change, and I remember reading in his first book how, the patients who began on his heart disease reversal program, their initial motivation was fear, understandably. Some of them had had heart attacks. Others had had an angiogram and said that they were, strong candidates for a heart attack. And so they started the program with a fear of death, a fear of disability, a fear of leaving their loved ones without their husband, their father, their son, their brother, whatever. But to be sustainable, to really last the distance, people have to reach the point where their changes are motivated by having more fun, more freedom, more pleasure, and more love in their lives. And so, as a couple of examples, when you undertake physical exercise, it actually stimulates new neuron growth in your brain. Your brain gets bigger. And this, of course, is really important as you get older so that you have more quality of life. You don't start suffering dementia, and you still have the ability to participate fully in life, which is the fun, freedom, pleasure, and love bit. I love this bit. Sex increases neurogenesis. So I can, in other words, again, it stimulates your brain growth. I can just see all the men listening to this tonight, saying to their loved ones in bed, come on, honey, it'll make your brain grow. Do it for that if you're not doing it for any other reason. Go ahead, fellas, let me know how that works. And women too, you can put the hard word on your man by saying, come on, let's make love. It makes our brains grow. Okay, another little interesting factoid, people who eat more vegetables have a 38% lower risk of cognitive decline when this is in people aged 65 and over. So that's a pretty impressive benefit just from eating more veggies. The intake of saturated and trans fats doubles the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease in that older age group. Again, just harking back to Michael Greger's presentation. I love this quote from Dean Ornish, the more you change, the better you feel and the more you improve. And this isn't age limited. So again, back to the idea that you want to shift to that motivation of wanting more fun and freedom, pleasure and love in your life. He's big on setting your own goal. His new book called The Spectrum is about people, and this is where, in contrast to McDougall, who says, just do it, just jump in, don't take this softly approach, just, jump in with your boots on. But, horses for courses. Dean Ornish recommends that you set your own goal and then just choose the degree of change that you need to achieve that. Now, once you achieve that goal, you might think, well, that was fun. Now I have a new goal. Now there are more changes that I want to make so that I can achieve that. And that's fine. You can make those changes over time. And the final point that he made is that there are three major crises that are besetting not just the US but the whole world, and our personal food choices are related to all of them. So in terms of environmental issues, animal-based agriculture is a major contributor to fossil fuel production. It's responsible, depending on whose report you read, for anywhere up to 50% of the world's total greenhouse gas emissions. By the way, if you haven't seen that new documentary Cowspiracy, go and watch it. it will really open your eyes about what the driving causes of climate change are. And of course the healthcare crisis, which isn't just an issue in the US, although they have the most impressive numbers, $2.8 trillion spent on so-called healthcare, really disease care every year. And you know, we can heal ourselves, we can heal the earth by changing what we eat, which is a really exciting and empowering message. Okay, on to Scott Stoll. God, we're still on day one. I need to speed it up here. So I'm going to talk really fast. Hopefully you'll still be able to understand me. So Scott Stoll gave some of the numbers, you know, really awful numbers of diabetes in the US, and this very, very challenging figure that, you know, a third of whites and half of minority, you know, Hispanics and blacks are predicted to develop type 2 diabetes. So, you know, of people who are now children, if you're Mexican or black, there's a 50-50 chance that you'll go on to develop diabetes if you live in the US, which is dreadful because of this higher all-cause mortality and the very high medical costs incurred by diabetes, especially for hospital admission for treatment of long-term complications. There is a genetic predisposition to type 2 diabetes, no doubt about it, but that's a relatively small part of it. It's actually the way that those genes operate, and processes like methylation and the transcription of the genes through RNA are the major factors. So yes, you have to have wonky genes to develop type 2 diabetes. A lot of people have that predisposition, but they'll never develop it. And that's because they're living and eating in ways that control the expression of these genes. One of the major factors is being born to an overweight mother. So if your mother is overweight or obese when she conceives you and when she's pregnant with you, that dramatically influences the gene expression of her unborn baby. So if a woman has gestational diabetes, her baby has between a 2 and 4 times greater risk of developing diabetes and metabolic syndrome and obesity. And considering the number of women who are in Australia who are now becoming pregnant and giving birth when they're severely overweight, this is really frightening for us as well as in the US. So once you have that high blood sugar, there's a whole lot of really damaging genes that get turned on. So inflammation promoting genes, they damage your blood vessels. Unfortunately, these studies that have been done, these trials that have been done where they try to achieve what's called tight control. So they use higher doses of diabetes medications to really keep the blood sugar level low. But it doesn't reduce complications. In fact, a couple of these trials were called off early because the diabetics who were on the tight control program were dying at a higher rate than those who were just on usual care, even though they had better numbers. So their glucose levels were better, their HbA1c was better, but they were still dying at a faster rate, at a higher rate than those who were just taking, you know, the usual meds. Your fat cells, which is your adipocytes, they can themselves become obese. So when you're eating too much fat, your fat cells become fat. You actually have overweight or obese fat cells, and they release a whole bunch of inflammatory chemicals which damage the blood vessels and trigger angiogenesis, and that's involved in cancer causation and also in diabetic retinopathy. And these inflammatory cytokines also impair insulin sensitivity, and that's the link between being overweight and becoming diabetic. These inflammatory cytokines also increase oxidative stress, and all those complications of diabetes, like the blindness and the kidney disease and the blood vessel disease, are related to oxidative stress. These fat cells also release a hormone called leptin, and that further reduces insulin sensitivity. It also, when you have too much leptin circulating, you never feel full. So this becomes a really vicious circle. You've got these overweight fat cells that are pumping out chemicals that make you hungry all the time and also make you unable to handle glucose. If you have high levels of heme iron, that's, you know, the red meat industry wants to promote the consumption of their products so that you won't become anemic. You know, they promote heme iron from blood, as being, you know, easily absorbed. Well, that's a problem, because the more heme iron you've got stored up, the more insulin resistant or essentially, you know, the more diabetic you become. And also, if you've got high levels of LDL cholesterol and VLDL cholesterol and a high blood glucose level, that actually kills off the beta cells, which are the cells that produce insulin, the cells in your pancreas. So Scott Stoll summarised the work of Neil Barnard. He's done trials in which type 2 diabetics were put on a low-fat plant-based diet. They restored their insulin sensitivity, got their blood glucose level back to normal. This is not an isolated case. In this other study by Dunev, they found that 12 weeks of low-fat plant-based diet and 66% of their participants had normalised blood sugar levels. And they were able to discontinue their medications, which is just stunning. They got their hemoglobin A1C down. They also decreased their blood pressure, their triglycerides. Just, fabulous results. There are cohort studies are studies in which you recruit a very large number of people who are, at the time that you recruit them, free of the disease that you want to study. And there are 3 major cohort studies that are ongoing and that give us an insight into diet and diabetes. The first is the Nurses' Health Study. This is a really big study. What they found was that eating processed meat often led to a higher risk of diabetes. So exposure to nitrates, which are those agents that are used to cure meats. There was also a higher inflammation level in women who were eating all this meat. And of course they had higher heme iron stores because of their meat consumption. Eggs were also found to be a risk for developing type 2 diabetes. The Seventh-day Adventist study found that if you ate meat regularly, you had nearly twice the risk of developing diabetes as if you didn't eat meat at all. And for men, there was a 80% higher risk of developing diabetes if you're a meat eater. For women, there was a 40% higher risk. They found that Adventist men had, these are from slightly different studies, so whichever way you slice and dice it, your risk of developing diabetes goes up dramatically if you're a meat eater compared to if you abstain from meat. The third major cohort study is the EPIC, which stands for the European Prospective Investigation into Cancer Study. Again, it's a big study, quite a long-term study, and what they found is that for every 5% more of your calories that you get from animal protein, you're looking at a 30% higher risk of developing diabetes. So you have a fairly small increase in intake of animal protein for a whopping great increase in diabetes. What they found was that you could eat as much vegetable protein as you liked and you weren't going to run a high risk of diabetes. So that was pretty interesting stuff. So just to summarise why you should use a plant-based diet to treat diabetes, it protects the beta cells. It also prevents the what's called concurrent disease, or the complications that occur with diabetes. So heart disease, kidney disease, nerve disease, stroke, cancer. You get better glycemic control, so better control of your blood sugar level, because the bacteria in your gut will ferment fibre and resistant starch from beans and whole grains and produce these fabulous things called short-chain fatty acids. And these make you more insulin sensitive, so they help to restore blood sugar control in diabetics. Also, he pointed out that a plant-based diet helps to overcome food addiction or dependency. If you're eating a whole food plant-based diet, those addictions to salt, sugar and fat tend to fall by the wayside, and the longer you stick to it, the less dependent on food you become. And of course, people just report feeling better, a better quality of life, and it's cheaper than drugs and procedures for diabetes, which means it's ultimately sustainable. One of the presentations I was really looking forward to is by William Lee, and very sadly he had a family emergency and wasn't able to attend the conference. So what I'll do is just refer you to his TED Talk, and once again you'll be getting the slides so you can follow these links and watch that online. But long story short, plant foods are very high in compounds that inhibit angiogenesis, which is the process by which cancer cells, and by the way also fat cells, grow a bigger blood supply. So cutting off angiogenesis means restricting the growth of tumours, and that means you'll probably die with your cancer rather than from your cancer. Anyway, watch that presentation, great. The evening session was by Thomas Campbell, who is, of course, the son of Professor T. Colin Campbell. I'm just going to run through this really quickly. the situation is quite similar here in Australia, but in the US, there's only a quarter of US medical schools that have a required course on nutrition, which means you can go through, I think it's about 5 years of pre-med and then medical school and not attend a single lecture on nutrition. Of those schools that do have a nutrition course, it's only 20 hours, whereas they'll get hundreds of hours in pharmacology. And what they cover isn't nutrition as in, eating foods, it's the metabolism of individual nutrients, like, this is what vitamin C does when you consume it, or this is what vitamin D does. So this is a really sorry state of affairs. It is the same in Australia, and this is why doctors graduate knowing less about nutrition than their receptionist, probably less about nutrition than many of their patients. And yet people go to them and they ask questions about nutrition. I mean, do you go to a plumber and ask him questions about fine art? Don't talk to your doctor about nutrition unless he or she has actually studied it. That's the moral of the story. Okay, let's go on to day 2. Cornel Esselstyn, giant of a man. Physically too, this guy is tall. He's 80 years old and he hasn't, I mean, if he's lost any height, he must have been really tall to start with. He's just an amazing guy. You can watch a very similar presentation to the one that he delivered at the conference on YouTube, and it's great. Highly recommend that you do. He summarizes the historic evidence. So, there are these civilizations throughout the world in which coronary artery disease was just unknown. No one had heart attacks. They didn't know what people were talking about when they said, does anyone here get heart attacks? They just didn't have it. Very frighteningly, the process of clogging of arteries actually begins in childhood in Western populations. And Dr. Cornel Esselstyn was an army surgeon. He served in Vietnam. And of the young soldiers who died in battle, when they autopsied them, and these were, 18, 19, 20-year-old guys. And to get into the army, you had to be fit, right? So these are fit young men. 80% of them had evidence of coronary artery disease, which you could see with the naked eye. Didn't need a microscope to see the plaques in their arteries. It was right there visible to the naked eye, which is really frightening. So if you've been eating the Western diet, and you're a male 65 years and older or a female 70 years and older, you have cardiovascular disease. You should be treated for that, not treated as in medically, but you should just assume that you have atherosclerosis and get yourself on a whole food plant-based diet to reverse that. So very interesting historical incident here where during the Second World War, Norway was sort of overrun by the Nazis, and there was a food blockade put in place, and also the Nazis seized all the stock animals. So they seized the cows and the pigs and the chickens, and they were used to provide food for the German soldiers. So in Norway, animal product consumption dropped dramatically, and you can see from that time when the Nazi invasion began, the coronary heart disease rate just dropped like a rock. And then once the war ended and they got their animals back, boom, up goes the heart attack rate. Now, someone asked me the other day, isn't stress linked to heart disease? And I can't think of any more stressful situation than your country being overrun by an enemy, not knowing whether your neighbour is a spy who's going to dob you in. Can you think of anything more stressful than that? So the Norwegians lived under this incredible stress throughout the war, and their heart disease rate became, just non-existent. So yeah, that's the stress link in my opinion. This is what happens with a plaque. You get these oxidized LDL cholesterol particles. They actually damage the artery wall. White blood cells called macrophages try to eat them. When they've eaten too many of them, they blow out into what are called foam cells, and these form a plaque. If you've got high blood pressure, so the blood flow is going in the direction of the arrow, and the cap of the plaque can become weakened by that, and then the contents of the plaque can actually erupt into what's called the lumen, which is the space in the middle of the artery through which the blood flows. This triggers the clotting mechanism, so you get platelet activation and fibrin and so forth. You form this whacking great clot, and then the areas downstream of the clot become starved of blood and they die. So if this happens in your heart, you've got a heart attack. If it happens in your brain, you have a stroke. If it's a clot that goes traveling through your body, it could be, for example, a pulmonary embolus. So that's the process by which clots occur. and the damage that they do. Now, it's worth noting that only 10% of heart attacks are caused by severe blockages, and these are the only ones that can be picked up by an angiogram. So people go to the doctor and they have an angiogram to see if they have blocked arteries, and that angiogram is only going to pick up a blockage if half of the artery is blocked off. But they're not the kinds of blockages that cause heart attacks. It's the smaller, what are called juvenile plaques that have a more friable cap. They're the ones most likely to cause a heart attack, and you won't see them on an angiogram. So how many times have you heard of a person who went and had their heart checked over by the cardiologist, and they're told, oh no, your arteries are fine. They walk out, and the old joke is, they have a heart attack in the reception area when they find out what the bill is. But that they'll often have a heart attack in the next couple of months, and they're completely surprised because the doctor just finished telling them that their arteries were fine. Well, you can't see the blockages that are likely to cause a heart attack. Now, so that's the bad news. The good news is that on the dietary program that Dr. Esselstyn recommends, you can drop your risk of heart attack in only 3 weeks, which is really amazing. You don't get any medical treatment that can do that for you. The endothelial cells, this is a big area of focus for Dr. Esselstyn. So these are the cells that line the blood vessels, and they're derived from cells in the bone marrow. So they migrate from the bone marrow to the inner lining of the arteries. And their stock in trade is to produce a gas called nitric oxide. Nitric oxide dilates the blood vessels, which lowers blood pressure. It decreases the stickiness of the blood. It stops the artery wall from becoming inflamed, and stops the formation of plaque and the growth of plaque. So what happens there is the smooth muscle from the artery can migrate into the plaque. So that's what nitric oxide prevents from happening. Nitric oxide also destroys these foam cells, these bloated white blood cells that cause plaque. So it's really important to maintain the health of your endothelial cells. So anything that damages endothelial cell function will increase your risk of heart attack. Now, people often say, well, you don't want to lower your cholesterol too much because your HDL will go down. I've had clients who come to me saying, I'm really worried. My overall cholesterol is low, but my doctor said my HDL is low and I have to do something to raise it. Well, that's rubbish. HDL HDL is involved in cholesterol efflux, which means getting rid of the stuff. And yes, that does protect against atherosclerosis, but the blood levels of HDL don't indicate the ability of HDL to get rid of cholesterol out of your system. So in other words, having a high HDL level will not protect you against heart attack. It doesn't indicate any protection. Statins, the drugs that lower cholesterol, don't improve the ability of HDL to get rid of the stuff from your bloodstream. A drug was tried, this was a couple of years ago, it was a huge fiasco for Pfizer, I believe. They invested millions of dollars into this drug that raised HDL, which it did very successfully. It also killed people, so they had to drop that one. So raising HDL, don't worry about it. If your overall cholesterol is low, your HDL will be low and it's no biggie. The average HDL of the Tarahumara Indians, among whom heart disease is virtually absent, is 0.65, which is low, but they don't have coronary heart disease. So yeah, no stress. The benefit of statins, if you have not had heart disease but you have high cholesterol, is very small. It's hard to calculate. It probably doesn't have an appreciable benefit for most people. And of course, stenting, if you are in the middle of a heart attack, you should have a stent inserted. It could save your life. But that's not what most stents are placed for. 92% of stent placement is elective. That is, there's a person who has an angiogram, they're told they have blockages in their arteries and they should have a stent. And there's no evidence of benefit for this group. In fact, 1% of them are likely to die on the operating table and 4% of them will have a heart attack in the process of having the stent placed. So, no benefit, 1% risk of dying, 4% risk of having a heart attack. Why do it? Especially when you can turn around your coronary risk so quickly by changing your diet. Esselstyn's original patient group was a group of very sick people, 24 people with severe triple vessel coronary artery disease. I mean, they were really stuffed. Many of them had been told, go home, set your affairs in order, you're going to die. And he put them on a dietary program which excluded all animal products, all coffee with caffeine, and no oil either. And instead they ate legumes and grains and vegetables and fruit. He puts a big emphasis on green leafy vegetables, and I had an interesting discussion with him after one of the presentations in which he elaborated in a bit more detail on why it's so important to chew your greens rather than blending them. So rather than having your greens solely in green smoothies, actually chew them up. And that's because there are bacteria that live in the grooves of your tongue, and when you chew, these bacteria actually produce nitric oxide from the green leafy vegetables, from the nitrates naturally occurring, nitrites, in green leafy vegetables. So that was his thing about chewing and eating a lot of green leafy veggies. So what happened with his patients? They had significant declines in all of their risk markers. Their blockages in the arteries were reversed. This is the angiogram of a man with a severe blockage in the left anterior descending. It's called the widowmaker. This is a blood vessel that is a major cause of fatal heart attacks. You can see how much it was clogged here, and so less than 3 years later, that vessel has opened up and it looks just like the vessel above and below. It's a perfectly normal blood vessel. Really stunning effect. They got relief from angina very quickly, as Ornish's patients found. There were 6 patients who dropped out. They just, couldn't handle the diet, and they had 13 new coronary events, so heart attacks, strokes, stent placement and so forth, whereas of the 18 patients who stuck with it, they'd been very sick. In the years, so that should be 5 years, not 58 years prior to the study, typo there. So they had, in the 5 years before the study, they'd had a total of 49 coronary events between them. Not a single one of them had another coronary event in 12 years of follow-up. This is remarkable. There's never been any study, any procedure or drug that can equal this. It's just amazing stuff. Esselstyn recently published another study. This was a larger scale one, 200 patients, and there was one, I believe there was a stroke in one of the patients who stuck with this program. So that's a 0.6% recurrent event rate. Of the people who dropped out, who didn't follow the program, 62% of them had another event. So that's like 100 times higher risk of having another coronary event if you dropped out of the program, if you didn't follow the diet. And so when Esselstyn compared his program, this is the treating the cause of coronary artery disease, to some of the other studies. So the Courage trial was percutaneous coronary intervention. This is a stenting trial. The natural history of atherosclerosis just means what happens to people with atherosclerosis if you don't treat them. And this was the Lyon diet heart study which supposedly demonstrates the benefits of a Mediterranean diet. So would you rather have a 25% risk of having a heart attack by eating a Mediterranean diet, or would you rather have a 0.6% risk by following the Esselstyn program? You don't have to be a mathematical genius to work out what gives better results. So obvious advantages of treating the cause of coronary artery disease. It doesn't kill you, and it doesn't make you feel sick. In fact, it makes you feel better, and you feel better the longer you stick with it. Esselstyn's patients had more energy. They felt better. They had better mood. They were able to get back into life, which of course makes people feel better. And of course they felt empowered. This disease that they were told was going to take their lives ended up being something that they could be in control of, which is psychologically incredibly beneficial. Interesting findings on lecithin and carnitine. So these are what are called carnonutrients. They only exist, or in the case of lecithin, mostly exist in animal products. And if you are an omnivore, if you eat animal products, you're going to have particular species of bacteria in your gut that produce trimethylamine N oxide. And long story short, this causes vascular disease. So again, thinking about people who are following the paleo diet and who insist that carnitine is a really important nutrient. Also, athletes who are supplementing with carnitine in the hopes that it'll improve their performance, they need to be really careful. They might get faster race times but end up dying sooner of heart disease. As was previously pointed out, dementia has the same risk as coronary artery disease, and it's caused by these little infarcts. So these little white spots in the brain here, they're actually little areas of tissue death in the brain that are caused by endothelial dysfunction, the same problem that causes the heart disease. This brain is just peppered. So these are actually autopsy studies, I believe, and this brain is just peppered with these white spots. This was a person who died of Alzheimer's disease. That's what your brain looks like when you eat meat. As was emphasised by some of the other speakers, really important to keep exercising as you get older. Check this out. This is the thigh muscle. There's the femur, and here's the thigh muscle of a 40-year-old triathlete. Here's a 74-year-old man who's a couch potato. Look at that fat. There's the muscle. There's actually fat that's infiltrated the muscle, and mostly he's just got fat. This is a 70-year-old man who is a triathlete. Do you see any difference between his legs and the 40-year-old's legs? Yeah, you're right. There aren't any. Maintaining activity throughout life is hugely beneficial, and it stops or slows down dramatically those so-called age-related declines in function. The North Karelia project, so I realise I'm running over time, so I'm just going to skip through this pretty quickly. North Karelia is a region of Finland which had the dubious distinction of having the highest heart disease rate in the world. They undertook a whole-of-government approach. They actually paid farmers who were producing animal products to grow crops instead. They also had smoking cessation programs and a number of different lifestyle programs. This is what happened to the heart disease rates with the institution of the North Karelia project. This is the power of when government actually gets on board and stops sucking up to vested interest and big business and starts paying attention to the science and actually helping their populace. Okay, and speaking of SED, this was a really interesting presentation. Again, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because it was very much about the US situation, but there are obvious applications of it to what happens here in Australia. So Michelle Simon is a lawyer. This is her website, Eat, Drink, Politics. She's got a great book out called Appetite for Profit. Highly recommend you read it. Her talk was about the dairy checkoff program. All dairy producers are required to pay a sum of money called the checkoff. What's it called? An application, I think, to the US Department of Agriculture, and the USDA uses that money to promote the consumption of dairy foods. They're actually working hand in hand with the dairy industry and the processed food industry to promote the consumption of dairy foods, mostly as junk food and cheese. And it's absolutely outrageous. They actually had 6 full-time employees of the US Department of Agriculture who work at McDonald's headquarters, and their job is to develop dairy-based product lines, including this horrid coffee drink, which contains 67 grams of sugar in one serve. So this is the US government that's working with junk food companies to develop these products. It's just gobsmacking. Of course, the products that they develop directly contradict the dietary guidelines which the USDA issues. And this is where it gets really nuts because, what do they say? You should be eating less saturated fat, you should be eating less sugar, you should be eating less sodium. And yet the products that they're promoting are, the major sources of saturated fat and sugar. They're just encouraging the consumption of these foods by both adults and children in the US. Crazy stuff. The other way that dairy products get effectively subsidised by the taxpayer is there's this program called the Women, Infants and Children, or the WIC program, and it's essentially a food stamps program. It's directed at poor and minority women, so black women, Hispanic women, of course, who are mostly lactose intolerant. So dairy products are being heavily pushed at these women, and the dairy industry successfully lobbied for many decades to prevent the subsidising of fruit and vegetables. So they prevented there being food stamps so that poor women could get fruit and veg at cheaper prices through this income support program. It is disgraceful what the dairy industry has been up to in the US, and they're somewhat less powerful here in Australia, but they still do a lot of dirty tricks, including influencing our nutrition guidelines that are issued by the NHMRC. Okay, so that was the US situation. T. Colin Campbell, this man is a legend. This was him receiving an award presented by Scott Stoll for his services to the movement, which he richly deserved. And this is me being thoroughly starstruck at meeting him, thanks to Jenny, who is my official photographer, Jenny Cameron. I'm just going to give a shout out. Jenny, are you on the call? I think Jenny was on. Oh, hi, Jenny, you are there. So, yeah, Jenny and I kind of, swapped taking photos of each other so we get our happy snaps. Thanks, Jenny. If you haven't read the China study or T. Colin Campbell's latest book, Whole, you just got to, go and get those books straight away. He also has a great online course in plant-based nutrition, which I'd highly recommend taking. And what are these two sources of misunderstanding of nutrition? The first is the overemphasis on protein, and the second is the focus on single nutrients, which he titles reductionism. That is trying to reduce everything down to, like, one cause, one action. Whereas nutrition functions as a whole. There's a holistic effect, which is why he called his latest book Whole. He points out that, there have been several diet studies that find some kind of benefit for a low carbohydrate, high protein diet, or, and or a Mediterranean diet. But what are they being compared to? They're being compared to junk food diets in which the so-called low-fat arm gets 30% of its energy from fat. In the Leonhardt study, the so-called low-fat arm of the study, the people there in that arm were eating more fat than those on the Mediterranean diet. It's a joke to call these low-fat. They're not, and they're junk food diets. So protein was discovered in the 1890s, and ever since it was discovered, people have been going nuts about it. It was called the stuff of civilization because it was discovered in animal products first. It was considered that meat protein or animal protein was higher quality. What does that mean? It has higher biological value, which means that when you expose cells to it, they grow faster. That's not necessarily a good thing. Cells growing faster means cancer. So yeah, animals that are fed and humans for that matter, who are fed a higher protein diet in childhood, they will grow faster, but they die sooner. They get cancer and they die. There's a saying among farmers, early to ripen, early to rot. And that's what happens when you eat more protein and grow faster. Of the phases of cancer, which is initiation, promotion, and progression, the high intake of protein basically drives every single one of these. So it means more chemical carcinogens are taken up into the cell. It increases the activity of the mixed function oxidase enzyme, which leads to DNA getting damaged, and that leads on to cancer. It increases mutation rates. It decreases the natural killer cell activity. They're the white blood cells that can mop up cancer in its early stages. So high protein intake effectively cripples your own immune system. High protein intake causes cells to divide faster, which is cancer. It increases free radical production and the levels of cancer-driving hormones. It increases the ability of cancer cells to grow a blood supply, which enables them to get bigger. If you restrict the total protein intake in experimental animals diets, I know a lot of you on the call are sort of coming to this from a more animal rights perspective, and you don't like animal research, and I agree, it's highly unethical, but this is the kind of research that Campbell did throughout most of his career, and he found that if you kept the protein percentage in animals' diets down to 10% or less, you could effectively prevent cancer growth even if you were dosing them up on carcinogens, known cancer-causing chemicals. It's not just cancer, of course. It's animal protein that raises the cholesterol level. People think that it's all about fat, but it's not. Intake of animal protein was found as far back as 1926 to raise cholesterol levels. And, big effect of cow's milk protein or casein compared to plant proteins. We don't need much protein. About 5 to 6% of total calories ensures that you have adequate nitrogen balance, or input and output of nitrogen, which means you get enough protein. So to calculate the recommended daily allowance, what the scientists did was to add 2 standard deviations. It's just a statistical term, which means accounting for variations in people's physiology, and that leads you to about 10%. So the recommended daily intake for years and years was about 10% of daily calories. A lot of people think that's the minimum. It's not. It's the optimum. That's the optimum amount of protein, for most people. There may be exceptions. Maybe athletes need a little more, but most people are now eating a lot more, 16 to 18% of daily calories, and that puts them into the danger zone. So in other words, the danger zone in which they're more likely to get cancer, partly because they're eating more of a nutrient that drives cancer, namely animal protein, and partly because the more animal protein they eat, the less plant foods they eat. There's not enough room on the plate to eat a big slab of meat and to eat broccoli and lentils and rice. So the more meat you eat, the less plant foods you're eating, and therefore the less protection you're getting from those plant foods when it comes to cancer. And there are obviously, some dramatic differences in the nutrient composition of plant foods compared to animal foods. Plants make antioxidants. Animal foods contain almost none. Complex carbohydrates only made by plants. Obviously, in low-carb diets, you have much lower percentages of carbohydrate than in the standard American diet. But even vegetarian and vegan diets tend to have less carbohydrate than the kind of whole food plant-based diet that Colin Campbell recommends. And of course that also means that low-carb diets have a lot more protein and fat when compared to either standard American or Australian diet, vegetarian diets, or certainly vegan diets. And the whole food plant-based diet, the combined fat and protein content is around 20%. So it's around 80% carbs, 20% fat and protein, dramatic difference. In terms of that second issue of individual nutrients kind of muddying the waters when it comes to nutrition, it's noteworthy that only about 3 to 4% of total medical research funding goes to nutrition research. And most of this isn't really what I would call nutrition research. It's investigating individual nutrients, mostly as supplements, kind of like, does vitamin C work for this disease? Or what happens if we give smokers beta-carotene? What happens is they get more lung cancer, just by the way, in case you didn't know that. So there's very little of the research going on that is the kind of research that we need to really validate these whole food plant-based dietary patterns. It's not being funded at government level. Not very much of it at all. A case in point with the individual nutrients is, of course, omega-3s, which everyone thinks are just the best thing since sliced bread. But a review of the evidence found that, in fact, they don't. There's no clear evidence that they have a beneficial effect on lifespan or cardiovascular disease or cancer. So, in fact, some studies have shown that you're more likely to get diabetes if you have more omega-3. If you eat oily fish or any fish at all, frequently you're more likely to have to develop diabetes. I mean, this focus on individual nutrients is quite misleading. So to contrast that to a holistic pattern, holistic nutrition from a whole food plant-based diet, what you've got, rather than just, this nutrient has that effect, what you're looking at is multiple nutrients that have multiple mechanisms in which they reverse multiple diseases. This is like the holy grail, rather than you take a pill for your blood pressure and a pill for your cholesterol and a pill for your diabetes, you just go on a whole food plant-based diet and it does the works. It restores your insulin sensitivity, it lowers your cholesterol, it lowers your blood pressure, it helps you lose weight, it improves your mood. Like, what more do you want? So multiple health improvements, and the effect is often very rapid. People feel better fast. And of course, if they sustain their dietary change, that improvement is maintained, and often it gets better over time. So you're looking at both prevention of disease and also treatment. Okay, the next presentation by Michael Clapper was very long, and again, I'm running way over time. Thank you for those of you who are hanging in there and staying with me. I will get through this as fast as I can. Dr. Clapper is a beautiful man. I had, again, the great pleasure of having lunch with him one day, and he's just a sweet guy. There's his website if you want to look him up. And he specialises in gut diseases and autoimmune diseases, and his particular area of focus is leaky gut. So there's this myth that you can't, that whole proteins don't survive the stomach, that they're broken down by hydrochloric acid and pepsin. There's another myth that you can't absorb whole proteins, so even if they made it out of the stomach, that you couldn't absorb them through the intestine anyway. And it isn't true. And we know it isn't true. There are several examples. For example, children with cow's milk allergy actually have cow's milk antibodies in their bloodstream. So what that means is the cow's milk protein has landed in their bloodstream and it's triggered their immune system to make an antibody. The antibody wouldn't be made unless the protein had shown up whole, undigested. Same with bromelain, which is an enzyme from pineapple that's often used as an anti-inflammatory. So the gut is this incredible organ. It's got this huge surface area. It's got its own nervous system. It houses 70% of the immune cells in the body. It has these two roles. It has to absorb the nutrients that you want, and it does that quite selectively, and it also has to keep stuff out of your bloodstream that doesn't belong there. So, of course, the intestine, in this diagram, this space in here where I'm mousing, that's called the lumen of the gut. That's where the food is, and also there's a lot of bacteria that live in the gut. So there's a lot of stuff that you don't want going into your body. To absorb the stuff that you do want, you have these little receptors on the surfaces of the cell, and they're very selective. They won't just absorb any old thing. They take up the nutrients that you need, and they just kind of like refuse to absorb anything that you don't need. It'll just pass out in the stool. Now, so this is what's called transcellular uptake. The stuff that you want is absorbed through these little receptors, and then it goes through the cell and gets shot out the other end, and there's a capillary running along here, and that takes the nutrients to your liver via the hepatic portal vein. Now, to stop stuff getting through that shouldn't get through, you have these tight junctions, these little proteins that act like washers, and they stick the cells together. And when these break down, when these little proteins break down, you can get what's called paracellular uptake. So this is where you have proteins and bacterial toxins coming from the lumen of the gut and getting into the bloodstream, which is bad. That triggers the immune system. So this is what we call intestinal hyperpermeability, or in popular parlance, a leaky gut. So it's a breakdown in barrier function. You get things passing into the gut that shouldn't be there, and that causes the immune system to go nuts, and that's what results in symptoms. So the barrier function is provided by mucus, the epithelium, the mucosal epithelium, which is the cells, and also the white blood cells that live in the gut lining. And there are all sorts of things can damage the mucus layer, like infections, so small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or SIBO as it's called. And these bacteria actually produce enzymes that break down that protective mucus. Viruses and protozoa can also do a lot of harm. Alcohol breaks down the mucus layer, so does shock gut or hypoxia, which can occur in surgery, for instance, and also free radicals that are produced by eating a high-fat diet or eating foods that have been fried, or being exposed to NSAIDs like aspirin. That damages the mucus layer. The tight junctions, those little washer-like proteins, can be damaged by allergy, and also by endotoxin, which is this nasty stuff that's released by bacteria as the bacteria break down. And the other thing that damages the actual cells of the intestine is cellular malnutrition. So cells when there's inflammation in the gut, the cells have a limited capacity to absorb the nutrients that they need for their own health, as well as the nutrients that they're absorbing for overall health of the body. The other thing that damages the cells lining the intestine is toxic bile. So when your bile is full of inflammatory compounds and reactive oxygen species, which is free radicals, that have been absorbed from or produced in the gut, that toxic bile actually damages the cells of the intestine. Remember, bile is shot out from your gallbladder into the small intestine when you consume a meal that contains fat. And if that bile is loaded up with these toxic compounds, it actually damages the wall of the gut. And of course, you can overstimulate and damage the white blood cells when they have too much contact with antigens or essentially allergy-provoking compounds from food and bacteria. Okay, so these are some of the disease conditions where you normally see leaky gut. It's quite a long list of skin disorders. There's asthma in there. There's bowel disorders, and there's also autism, and even AIDS. So symptoms you're likely to get if you have a leaky gut include these. So, just feeling crook, feeling tired, joint pain, muscle pain, mysterious fevers, food intolerances, abdominal pain and distension, diarrhea, skin rashes, just feeling toxic, cognitive and memory deficits, shortness of breath, and poor exercise tolerance. Of course, these are symptoms that could occur with a wide range of different pathologies, but if you have lots of these, you should get yourself checked out for leaky gut. How do you treat it? I was really happy because this is actually how I've been treating leaky gut for years, so it felt good to have my approach confirmed. First of all, stop doing whatever's causing the injury. I mean, stop drinking the alcohol, stop consuming the animal products that produce the endotoxin, stop taking aspirin. Change your diet, eat a high nutrient diet. It provides nutrients and it changes your gut flora so you don't get these toxic bacteria in there. Chew your food. I've been listening to Michael Clapper's podcasts and interviews for years, and I knew from way back he was big on this chewing thing. There's actually this epidermal growth factor that promotes the growth of cells in your gut, and it's activated when you chew. So get in there and chew your food. Don't always turn your food into smoothies. Get into chewing as well. And there are some various nutrients that help to heal the gut, and essential fatty acids such as the long-chain omega-3s, which you can get from algae. You don't have to get them from fish oil, and gamma-linolenic acid, which you can get from evening primrose. And there are some various nutrients that help to clear out the liver so it doesn't produce that toxic bile. Saccharomyces boulardii is a type of non-pathogenic yeast. It controls the growth of Candida albicans, which is often a feature of leaky gut, and stimulates production of secretory IgA, which helps to normalise immune function. And if you do have severe small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, Dr. Clapper does recommend, in some cases that you use antibiotics or antifungals for that, but always take probiotics. So that's the treatment. People who suffer inflammatory bowel disease, so this is Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, as well as the leaky gut issue, they're more likely to be overeating sugar. That's not from fruit, that's sugar. They're more likely to be overeating animal fat and omega-6 fats from oils. They're more likely to be overeating animal protein. So, of course, a whole food plant-based diet is beneficial in the treatment of inflammatory bowel disease because it changes the gut flora, it reduces the exposure to damaging endotoxin, reduces inflammation. For those who don't get better just from adopting a standard whole food plant-based diet, Dr. Clapper recommends a baseline safety diet. So it's like an elimination diet. You just eat brown rice, sweet potatoes, steamed green veg, steamed yellow veg, and non-citrus fruit. You do that for 2 weeks. Until your symptoms settle down, and then you add in a food like you test it out, and you just do that every 3 days to see whether that food causes a flare up in your symptoms. And again, I've been doing these kind of elimination diets for many years with my clients who have gut issues and also autoimmune disorders like rheumatoid arthritis. It really works fabulously well. If you do find a food that seems to play up, you leave it out and then you try it again in 6 months. Some people, of course, don't tolerate FODMAPs foods. They're the ones that have the complex sugars or starches. A low FODMAPs diet is not a good idea long term. Even the originator of the low FODMAPs diet doesn't recommend people stay on it permanently. You just cut out those FODMAPs, which is the oligosaccharides, disaccharides and so forth. So legumes and onions and certain fruits and vegetables, you cut them out until the gut symptoms settle down. And in the meantime, you focus on rehabilitating the gut, and then you can reintroduce the FODMAPs foods in most people. Okay, again, just compressing this for reasons of time. Thanks again for those who are still hanging on the line. Phil Chuso, he's the National Clinical Lead for Total Health with Kaiser Permanente. The American healthcare system is markedly different from ours. Very briefly, rather than having a universal healthcare system like our Medicare, it's kind of a patchwork system where for people who are working, most of them are actually insured by HMOs or health maintenance organisations, and that insurance is provided by their employer. So part of their employment package is health insurance cover, and it's estimated that about $1,500 of the cost of every car that rolls off the GM production line, about $1,500 of that is actually attributable to payments by General Motors for health insurance for their employees. So it's really expensive. Kaiser has long been known as an innovator in healthcare in HMOs. They're really forward thinking, and Phil Chuso is one of a team at Kaiser that's really spearheading a totally different approach so they're moving from a disease care model to a healthcare model. Kaiser is well set up for this because they work on a panel system, so they collect contributions from members, and then those contributions are allocated to the treatment of patients, and so there isn't an incentive for doctors to carry out pricey procedures like coronary artery bypass grafting, when they could treat that patient with a low-cost intervention like dietary change and still get paid the same amount of money. So this is a really powerful force for change. The Save EC video, this is really cute. EC stands for endothelial cells. Watch this video. It's super fun. It presents the whole idea of eating for health in a kind of animated style, Even kids can understand and enjoy this. So Kaiser Permanente is the largest managed care organisation in the US. They employ 15,000 doctors. They insure 9 million Americans. So they are huge. And being huge makes them powerful. When they decide to make a change, they create ripples that are going to go right through the managed care system in the US. So they're rolling out what they call a total health strategy. Their aim is to move their members, the people that they insure, just average Americans, from a Western lifestyle to what they call a total health lifestyle. And the key planks of that are regular exercise and a plant-based diet. They're transitioning from a model in which their doctors treat illness to a model in which their doctors are paid to prevent illness and foster wellness. Really groundbreaking stuff. And so their initial objectives are to increase fruit and veg intake in their members and increase exercise. And so now whenever any of their members goes to see a doctor, and they employ doctors, they don't work independently, the doctor is employed by Kaiser Permanente. So when the patient goes to see a doctor, the first question the doctor will ask is, how much fruit and veg do you eat and how often do you exercise? So rather than, just doing a meds review, they're actually doing a diet and exercise review, which is fabulous. And they're developing strategies to help their members eat more fruit and veg and get more active, which is just brilliant. So the little acronym that Phil Chuso presented was behaviour change equals motivation, which could be provided by a diagnosis or a loss of function or just, getting disgusted with yourself for being overweight, times ability. And ability is what doctors and other healthcare providers can increase. So they can inform patients, they can equip them with skills like, how to shop for healthy food and how to cook it. And then triggers is about manipulating the patient's environment so they're more likely to stay on track. And Kaiser publishes a number of peer-reviewed medical journals. As you can see, it's actually indexed in Medline. So, what that means that these articles are actually searchable. So this is a peer-reviewed journal, which means, it's every article published is examined by a panel of experts in their field. And this article was published last year. It was co-authored by Phil Chuso and Benjamin Ha, who also spoke at the conference. And I'll just show you this bit. So it's kind of like, you could say, a directive that they're issuing to the doctors that they employ. Healthy eating may be best achieved with a plant-based diet, whole plant-based foods, discourage meat, dairy products and eggs, discourage refined and processed foods. Plant-based diets are cost-effective, low-risk interventions. Physicians should consider recommending a plant-based diet to all their patients, especially those with high blood pressure, diabetes, cardiovascular disease or obesity. And let me tell you, there was a standing ovation at that point because, and I would just wish we had some of their driving forces in Australia. Unfortunately, our Medicare system provides a perverse disincentive to this kind of change, but with any luck this will change over time. So that's what's happening in the US. It's the cradle of the best and the worst. It's got the worst food in the world, it's got the worst healthcare system or disease care system in the world, and it's got some of the best as well. Okay. So this is a brochure that Kaiser has produced, and they distribute to all their doctors and to hand out for free to their patients. It's just great. You can actually download a PDF of this as well. I'll send you a link to that. It's brilliant stuff. Okay, look, I'm covering this talk for completion. I have some serious misgivings. Jenny Cameron, who I'm just going to check. Oh, Jenny's actually left the call. Must be getting too late for her. Jenny is a research librarian. Her partner, Malcolm Mackay, is a GP, a plant-based GP in Melbourne. And Jenny, being a research librarian, knows a thing or two about qualifications. And so, just a heads up here, this PhD that belongs to Brian Clement was issued by a university in the US that is a notorious degree mill. That's a term for universities that are kind of like they're a front. They don't actually have a campus. And it's pretty much, you pay for your degree. So, look, I mean, just take that into account when you check this guy out. You can go and have a look at the Hippocrates Institute. They do claim, great success in treating diseases, and Brian Clement did point out that phytochemicals, these compounds that are found in whole plant foods, do play really important roles in preventing and reversing disease. So sulforaphane in broccoli, for instance, has beneficial effects on DNA. It inhibits cancer stem cells. There were a lot of, valuable things that he recommended. This is one concern I have. He recommended eliminating all sugar from cancer patients' diets, including fructose from fruit. He says they get better results at Hippocrates from eliminating fruit. I've, of course, heard completely the opposite. So, take with a grain of salt or not. He recommends an all-raw diet for various reasons. Again, I think, a lot of the reasoning behind this is very faulty. It's an incomplete picture. But he claims some really impressive success stories with cancer and CFS and fibromyalgia. So, I mean, I am very wary of him given the dubious nature of his qualifications and the sort of partial, the patchy scientific foundation of his recommendations. But hey, look him up if you're interested in this kind of approach. Okay, where do we go? Oh, yes, he mentioned fish oil being linked to a higher risk of high-grade prostate cancer, and that it can reduce the function of the immune system, whereas omega-3s derived from plants appear to suppress prostate cancer. Here's another little interesting factoid. On average, if you're diagnosed with cancer in the US, you're going to make $1 million for some drug company or other. So there's not a huge amount of incentive for these companies to fund research on food. They won't make any money out of that. Okay. Another interesting little factoid. Germany, which is, probably if you took a poll of the country least likely to adopt a plant-based diet, I think a lot of people would vote Germany, changing dramatically, with over half the German population now consciously avoiding meat, on a regular basis. So, good changes happening. Terry Mason. Oh, this was fun. I really, really enjoyed his talk. You might have seen him if you've seen Forks Over Knives. He's this fabulous, jovial, black doctor. He's a urologist, former urologist, who now works in the public health department in, I think it's Ohio. And so his talk was on erectile dysfunction, and he showed some really graphic videos of the kinds of procedures that men with erectile dysfunction undergo. I mean, my God, I just don't even want to talk about it. I could barely watch just seeing these devices implanted in men's scrotums and penises and what they had to go through to achieve an erection. His point being, of course, that, you know what, you don't have to do that. Men, if you have erectile dysfunction, change your diet, because erectile dysfunction is caused by the same factors that cause angina and that cause Alzheimer's and lower back pain. It's clogged arteries. So it's very prevalent. About 4% of men in their 50s have erectile dysfunction at least some of the time. By the 60s, nearly 17% of men are having a complete inability to achieve an erection, and in older men, it's nearly half of them can't achieve an erection or maintain an erection, which is, people don't stop wanting to have sex as they get older. Some do, I suppose, but a lot still want to maintain their sex life, and it's good for them. It's good for them personally. It's good for their relationship. So this is really sad when men become sexually incompetent in that way. It's very devastating for them. So it's not an inevitable part of aging. It isn't just something that happens as you get older. It's treatable at any age, and it's treatable with diet. So risk factors, look at these. These are the risk factors for heart disease. Come on, you've seen all this before. So, diabetes, heart disease risk factors, smoking. If you make changes in all of these to benefit your heart, you're also likely to, you're almost guaranteed to experience a benefit in terms of erectile function. So the same endothelial cells that are necessary to prevent heart attacks, they're also required for normal erectile function. And so he described erectile dysfunction as the canary in the coal mine. So it's a strong predictor of your risk of having a heart attack. In fact, it's a better predictor. It's more accurate than having an angiogram. So as I mentioned before, when you have an angiogram, it only picks up severe vessel blockages or really extensive vessel blockages, but they're not likely to cause a heart attack. Whereas, as you'll see, for men who had erectile dysfunction before a cardiovascular event, this is a really strong predictor. So you had nearly double the risk of developing angina if you previously had erectile dysfunction before the angina started. About the 1.86 times higher risk of having a heart attack. Really dramatically higher risk of having a stroke. Nearly 3 times higher risk of having a stroke if you've had a history of erectile dysfunction. Ditto for a TIA or a mini stroke. You're just more likely to die of anything if you've had erectile dysfunction. So it's a warning. It's a warning that things aren't right. And don't just go to the doctor and get Viagra. Go and sort out your diet. So this is the process of clot formation. You see the various stages in terms of fatty deposits and rupture of a clot. This is the kind of obstructive clot that can just sort of close off the entire artery. And that's, what tends to happen in the penile arteries, and this is what contributes to erectile dysfunction. So what's the treatment? Oh, you've guessed by now, surely. It's a whole food plant-based diet with a particular focus on antioxidant-rich foods. Love these pictures. So these were from a work called The Hungry Planet. And basically the project was to get people in various countries to put what they and their family ate for an entire week. Put that on a table and then photograph it. So what you see here is tons of fruit and veggies, 4 people. There's actually not a heck of a lot of food when you really look at it for 4 people. And most of it is plant-based, and there's very little processed food. There's a few packets and bottles up the back here, but it's mostly unprocessed food. So they were obviously Indian, and these people are Asian. So similar picture, it's mostly plant food. There's a bit of animal product down here, but it's mostly plant food. It's mostly unprocessed. Okay, you ready for it? So this is your typical black family. Check that out. I mean, where's the food? We've got some grapes over here. That might be an apple. I can't really tell. It's some kind of fruit, and that's it. And the rest of it is in packages and boxes. And so really you've got to ask yourself the question, why would these people be surprised? Why would he be surprised, this guy at the back here, if he developed endothelial dysfunction that resulted in erectile dysfunction? How would he not get that? Really? Okay. So, again, I'm just going to race through this. This is about randomized controlled trials. Michaela Carlson was one of the original employees of T. Colin Campbell with his online program for plant-based nutrition. She's currently working toward a PhD in nutrition, and this is her website, plantbasedresearch.org. Go and check it out. It's just great. And what she was talking about was this whole field of plant-based nutrition research. It's very new, but there's a lot more studies that show that confirm the benefits of it that is generally known, especially by doctors. She pointed out that it's really important to not just kind of get thrown off course or not get knocked out by one particular study. You've got to look at the totality of the evidence. And this is really important because the media often just jump on, a study that proves this or disproves that, and they say, that's it, that's the end of the story. Well, it's not. If that study happens to be contradicted by half a dozen others, then it doesn't negate those. It's got to be looked at in a total context. Now, if studies are conducted very poorly, then that decreases the overall strength of evidence. So it is important to look at how studies were conducted and make sure that they're methodologically strong. And of course, there are lots of different study designs, and they have various strengths and limitations. These are so the major types of studies are case reports, which is where a doctor just says, "Well, I had this guy and he came to see me, he did this, and it got better." And you can get those published. They are accepted in medical journals, but they're not very strong evidence. Cross-sectional means looking at people's habits and disease risks at one point in time. So the China study conducted by T. Colin Campbell was cross-sectional. Case control is where you take people who've already got a disease and then you match them to people who don't have that disease but are otherwise quite similar, and you try to figure out, what kinds of lifestyle exposures or what kinds of behaviours might have been similar or different in those two groups of people, so that you can try to figure out what might have been the cause of the disease in people who've got it. Retrospective cohort studies is where you do that but on a much larger scale. Prospective cohort studies are the ones like the Seventh-day Adventist and the EPIC and the Nurses' Health Study that I mentioned before. So you recruit a bunch of people, they don't have the disease that you're interested in at the start, you follow them up over long periods of time, and you analyse what they do in terms of their diet and their exercise and whatnot to see how that influences whether they get the disease or not. Randomised controlled trials are considered the highest level of evidence, but they're not necessarily applicable to dietary studies because you can't you can't have a double-blind placebo-controlled trial of food. Double-blind means the patient doesn't know whether they're in the treatment group or not. And the thing is, people know what they're eating. They're going to know if you're feeding them lentils as opposed to KFC. So these kinds of studies are appropriate for drug trials, but not for nutrition trials. Okay, so there are some major studies of plant-based nutrition, including the Seventh-day Adventist Health Study, really big study, great cohort to study because they have a variety of dietary practices. The EPIC Oxford, they deliberately recruited people with a wide range of dietary practices. And there have been some randomized controlled trials that have been carried out on various diseases. And generally they've found very favourable results, but there are some weaknesses in these studies, particularly the smaller ones. So there are some great studies on rheumatoid arthritis and fibromyalgia, great in terms of outcome. You know, people got better on a plant-based diet or you know, a raw or whole foods diet, but they're very small studies, and that means that, you know, they don't necessarily carry a lot of weight when it comes to persuading doctors to adopt this kind of treatment. There's studies of high protein diets. You know, once again, they're comparing a high protein, low carbohydrate diet to the standard American or standard Australian diet. So if you compare a diet that excludes processed food to a crappy junk food diet, people are going to do better on the high protein, low carbohydrate diet, to which I would say, duh. What you really need is a study that compares the high protein, low carbohydrate diet to a healthy whole food plant-based diet. And Michaela Carlson's actually involved in just that kind of study right now. So what they found when they did analyse various follow-up studies for carbohydrates is that people who were eating a low carbohydrate diet that was based on animal foods had higher risk of dying of anything, and particularly of cancer and cardiovascular disease. Those who ate a low carbohydrate diet that was based on vegetables were less likely to die of anything, and they had a lower risk in particular of cardiovascular disease. So if you are eating a low carbohydrate diet for whatever reason, you want to make sure it's plant-based and not animal-based. So this is a study that Michaela Carlson is involved in, and they've recruited people who follow paleo and people who follow a vegan diet and all sorts of different diets, so that they can assess what happens to people who you know, deliberately selected a diet that is low in processed food, sweeteners and refined flours, but in other ways is quite diverse in terms of whether it's animal or plant-based. Okay, so Feeling the Plant-Based Athlete, I'll just whiz through this. You know, obviously, if you're interested in this, look up James Loomis. So central point is, you know, our ancestors were constantly going through this cycling of intense exercise and then rest, and then getting lots of food and then not having any. And what that meant is that they ran out of glycogen or carbohydrate stores in their muscles and livers, and they ran out of fat in their muscles and livers pretty regularly. So they'd run out of those stores, and then they'd go eat and they'd top them up again, and then deplete them and then top them up again. And what this ended up selecting for is so-called thrifty genes. So this is people who have a tendency to gain weight, even when they're not sort of, you know, overeating hugely. So our genes are out of step with our modern environment. You've heard that one before. But in particular, it's the fact that inactivity and constant eating, you know, not having any periods of low food availability, leads to these increasing stores of glucose and triglyceride in our fat tissue, and that results in our muscles not burning up a lot of glucose, and consequently, you know, there's a high blood sugar level and high insulin levels, and that leads on to metabolic syndrome, which is a risk factor for diabetes and heart disease. So when you exercise, you reverse this. You restore that cycle of depleting and repleting glycogen and triglyceride in the muscles and in the liver too. Metabolic efficiency is mainly determined by what we eat. You need to have, your cells need to be sensitive to insulin, and aside from the dietary factors I've mentioned, insulin sensitivity is improved with exercise training. So these are the tips for athletes to be able to perform longer during prolonged exercise. So, you know, eat more starch and eat more carbohydrates so that you've got more stored glycogen, and maintain your fat burning. And for those who are doing really long events like Ironman events, they need to maintain their carbohydrate intake, so, you know, continue to consume carbohydrate during the exercise session. and then get into the carbohydrate afterwards. So just a quick little chart here showing what kinds of energy sources are used for various forms of exercise. And as you can see, when you do long periods of aerobic exercise, mostly what you burn is fat. That's free fatty acids right there, and triglycerides from fat tissue. Okay, so you burn, some glycogen or carbohydrate as you exercise for long periods of time, but mostly what you're burning is fat. And what's interesting is that the kind of carbohydrate that you eat before you go into endurance exercise has a big impact on your exercise capacity. So if you eat a low glycemic index meal, that will keep your blood sugar level low and your insulin level low, and it actually increases fat burning. So you don't want to carb up before an event by eating a high GI meal. That'll actually reduce your fat oxidation and make you dependent on burning carbohydrate, and that means that you'll hit the wall a lot sooner. So you spare and extend the availability of glucose sources if you eat a low GI meal rather than a high one. So, converse is that eating a high GI meal means you don't burn fat as efficiently and then you hit the wall. Okay, so these are some of the particular figures about how much carbohydrate to consume during extended exercise and how much to have afterward to restock. And if you're doing endurance exercise regularly, then stick to low GI foods on a daily basis. Okay, protein intake, of course, highly overestimated by most athletes. They don't need as much as they think they do. There's a sweet spot of around 0.8 to 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. Most athletes are wildly exceeding this, especially strength and power athletes like bodybuilders. Football players and so forth. So they're often eating between 2 and 3.5 grams of protein per kilo of body weight per day, which is wildly excessive. And most athletes who take protein supplements are actually already getting more than enough protein from their diet. Having all that protein risks decreased performance because you're not getting enough carbohydrate in. You can suffer lower bone density, increased kidney disease, and increased risk of cancer and heart disease. Okay, oxidative stress, so this is the free radical activity which is increased by exercise. It has some benefits. It does help the immune system, not during the exercise but after. You need it for wound healing and cell metabolism, but excessive oxidative stress can actually damage your DNA and cause cell aging and damage your blood vessels, and also make your muscles hurt afterwards. So what do? Make sure you're not overdosing on omega-6s, have enough omega-3s, preferably plant-sourced, and increase your antioxidant intake. So benefits of a whole food plant-based diet for athletes: they get better carbohydrate to protein to fat ratio. This whole food plant-based diet, it improves running performance in athletes and limits their DNA damage to their cells, the inflammatory response, oxidative stress, helps them restock their energy stores after exercise. The Tarahumara Indians are these amazing super athletes who live in this isolated part of Mexico, and they're if you've ever read Christopher McDougall's book Born to Run, he describes their amazing athletic feats, and these people eat carbohydrates. They're not eating a high protein, high fat diet, they're eating lots of carbs. Okay, so that's the ideal for athletes. For an athlete who's just transitioning, it's best to do it in the off season and to slowly increase your high fiber foods so you don't get gut upsets and don't make changes in your diet during competition. So there was Terry Mason who talked about, and I forgot to mention, I'm sorry too, in discussing in discussing erectile dysfunction, he did point out that the same factors that impair sexual function in men also apply to women. So women who aren't achieving sexual satisfaction, who can't achieve a clitoral orgasm, they may be suffering the same diminishment of blood flow to their clitoris, which is an organ that needs to become engorged with blood as well. So ladies, if you're not lighting up in bed, it may not be him that's to blame. You may actually need to just eat more plants. So there's the fantastic Terry Simon, and this was the Aussie contingent. There were quite a number of us who flew from Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, Perth to the conference, and we're all hoping to stay in touch with each other and really just promote this mission, this message of plant-based nutrition. So I will actually skip that bit. These are some of my clients who have had great results with plant-based diets. But what I wanted to mention is, if you've been watching this and thinking, hey, really need to change my diet, but where do I start? I'm running a 6-week nutrition and healthy cooking course. It starts on the 18th of October. And just for sticking with me tonight, for showing this commitment to learning, I'd love to offer you a $50 reduction on the price of the next class. You can just go to this link and enter this coupon code when you get to the checkout. It says PBNHC, which stands for Plant-Based Nutrition Healthcare Conference. Just enter that, and that'll give you $50 off. And I'd love to see you at the class. If you're not in Sydney, of course, and you can't attend, then you might prefer to get the DVD set. The DVD set is actually the entire course on video. And once again, I'd like to offer you a special reduction of $20 on that. The coupon code for that is PBNHC DVD, so Plant-Based Nutrition Healthcare Conference DVD. You'll be getting these slides, so if you've missed those coupon codes so you don't have a pen, don't worry, I'll get these slides to you. Those discounts are good until tomorrow. In fact, I think I'm going to extend those because they have gone wildly over time, which means a lot of people were not able to stay to the end. I do apologise for those of you who are up way past your bedtime. Thank you for staying with me, and I'll get this info to you tomorrow so that you can enroll in the class if that's of interest to you, or get the DVD set. The full details of what's included is at those links, by the way. So you can just go to empowertotalhealth.com.au/cooking classes or /HEFL -DVD and get the info on what's included. You actually get the DVD set if you attend the class, by the way. But the DVD set alone is a good option for people who can't attend the class. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly whiz through the chat box and see if there were any questions that people wanted me to answer. So just give me a sec while I scroll through that. And if you have any questions that you would like answered and you want me to unmute you, if you've got an expert on mic, just message me quickly in the chat and I can unmute you. Okay, what have we got here? No, it's mostly sound check stuff. Okay. Yeah, Anna wrote, this was in relation to the video of the hospital that unfortunately didn't play. Amazing, so inspiring. Just spent a week in a Sydney hospital and couldn't eat one thing. Who relates to that? Oh, I think Lorna has put the link to the video in the chat box. Great. Everyone can see that, I hope. So go ahead and you can watch that. Anna, will these slides be available after the webinar? Yes, they will. Oh, Kylie already answered that. Cool. Great. Helen wrote, frustrating to know both my parents who suffer from arthritis and are both overweight and my father who has had cancer don't seem to believe me when I told him to get off the animal products and move to a plant-based diet. I wish Robin would sit them down and say, shut up and listen. You can play them the webinar if you like. Helen, I'll send you the link and you can just, gag them and tie them to a chair and make them listen. Okay, we had some audio issues. Someone else gave a thumbs up to Doug Lyle's book. Okay, wow, lots and lots and lots of comments. I love this. I love the engagement. This was so cool. Helen asked, what is it recommended to read on depression and lifestyle, diet and nutrition? What's your view? Helen, I've written a number of articles on this. If you want to just go to my website and click on the articles tab, there is an index there of various subjects that I've covered. I've written a lot about depression and lifestyle. The short story is that a whole foods plant-based diet and regular exercise is a more effective treatment for depression than any antidepressant, shock therapy or anything else that's ever been used. So check that out. Feel free to private message me on Facebook or email me about that if you want some further info. Okay, yeah, a couple of people had audio problems, but not always. Helen said this is what vegan workshops should contain. Yeah, I agree, Helen. Many new vegans and those curious are going plant-based need to hear. Yes, I agree. The problem is that people who go plant-based for ethical reasons often just want to eat vegan junk food. And, it's a free country. If you want to do that, you know, go ahead. It's your own choice. But if you want to be healthy and you want to live a long, healthy life, then you need to go past the vegan junk food and start eating whole food, plant-based. Thanks, Chloe. I know you couldn't stay. Chloe wrote, thanks for a good talk. Really interesting stuff. Looking forward to seeing the rest of the slides. Helen, great. Thanks, Jenny. Okay, Little had to leave early. Okay, all right, lots of thank yous. Thank you, everyone. Just seeing if there's any questions. I'm scrolling right down to the bottom here. Okay. Oh, Lorna, Chief Glad, or was it Andy? I've just got Lorna and Andy here, so I'm not sure whether this was Lorna or Andy, but one of them said, I have low HDL and LDL cholesterol. One thing doctors have said to me is that cholesterol is needed to make hormones. Yeah, that's true, but your body's smart enough to figure how much cholesterol you need. Your body synthesizes its own cholesterol on an as-needs basis. So there's no such thing as having too low a cholesterol level. There was a study a while back that people interpreted it as indicating that low cholesterol increased your risk of cancer. In fact, what happens is that in people with advanced cancer, where the cancer affects their liver, they're actually no longer able to synthesize cholesterol. So in other words, cancer is the cause of low cholesterol, not low cholesterol is the cause of cancer. So Lorna or Angie, whoever that question was for, don't stress. Low HDL is great. Low LDL is great. Low HDL is actually fine. Brett, how about your varicose veins? Okay, interesting. Yeah, bigger topic than I can cover here, Brett. I'll be able to chat with you when I talk to Gemma next anyway, so we'll cover that. Thank you, Evelyn. Oh, John's got a few questions about diabetes. Where I can't see those questions, but John will be speaking soon, so I might cover that in person with you. Brett, any chance of recovery? I presume that means the varicose veins. Depends on how far advanced they have, but it can certainly limit their development. Helen, my father has had testicular cancer and heart arrhythmia. Oh boy, just get him onto this, Helen. Okay. On a question about warfarin. Oh, John, I think John might have wanted me to unmute. Let me see. I think he's left the call. All right. So, look, anyone who would like to be unmuted. Oh, John, yeah, You're still on. Okay. Yes, John, I shall unmute you now. I'm just finding you. Looks like you're self-muted. John, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself? I've just manually unmuted you. See if you can, see if there's a button there that you can unmute yourself. Oh, beautiful. Okay. Do you want to just say hi and I'll do a voice check? Oh, we've got bad background sound. Okay, John, I can't hear you. There's just this sort of swishing sound. So I'm going to assume that either you don't have an external mic or your mic's not working. And if you want to, if you can just quickly type your questions in the chat box, I'll be able to cover them. I'm just going to mute you now because that sounds pretty awful. Okay, sorry about that, John. So, look, I'm just going to hang on the line for anyone who has further questions. If you don't have any further questions and you're getting kind of tired, then look, feel free to log off and leave the webinar. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. I sometimes feel like I'm the only nutrition nerd out there who gets really excited by this stuff, but it's so gratifying to see so many of you have stuck around right to the end because you're excited by this too. So thank you. It's really gratifying. So John's typed this question: how to treat someone who refuses treatment for diabetes because of mental problems. Sorry, I've just lost that. Could diet alone do? Yes, the problem is compliance. So if they're, sorry, I'm assuming you mean refuses medical treatment. Then yes, if you're in a situation where you can kind of, ensure that person eats a whole food plant-based diet, for sure. If we're talking about a type 2 diabetic, you can definitely help them. You can reduce their blood glucose level. You can, you can't use the word cure legally, but effectively you can reverse their diabetes. It's all about compliance, though. Oh, Helen, thank you so much. I'm not the only nerd. Dave Hayes, I'm such a nutrition nerd too, Robin. Thank you. Cool. I'm not alone. Okay, sweet. And Lorna, Andy, thank you so much. Andy's going to send this on to his daughter who's keen to study nutrition. Yeah, if she's going to study nutrition in Australia, she'll probably have to jump the hoops of the normal kind of, industry infiltrated course. But after that, I'd go and study T. Colin Campbell's plant-based nutrition course. Okay. Romain, my pleasure. Read those books. Yeah, you'll have all the titles of the books in the slides, so go ahead and read them. Watch these presentations online. They are great. Okay. Thanks, Lorna. Thanks, Andy. So glad you enjoyed it. I'm signing off now because I'm, oh, sorry, John, one further question. On warfarin, higher intake of greens. Yeah, so the issue here with warfarin, as many of you would know, is that warfarin's a blood thinning agent. It's prescribed for people who've had a history of heart attack or stroke or some kind of clotting disorder. And it's counteracted by vitamin K. So some doctors will recommend that patients on warfarin don't eat greens. More enlightened doctors say, go ahead and eat greens, but hold their intake constant. So you will find that if a patient on warfarin is eating more greens, they may need a slightly higher dose, and that's fine. They just need to make sure that they have a consistent intake of greens. So you could weigh that and make sure they have the same weight of greens each day, or use a volume measure. You've just got to make sure that they have adequate greens. And this is really important because warfarin works by interfering with vitamin K activity, and that actually causes calcification of the arteries and also reduced bone density. So it's important to get the greens in to help to counteract that. Otherwise, this person who's on warfarin to try to prevent clotting is actually at a higher risk of heart disease because their arteries are calcified from taking the warfarin. I know, it's wacky. Most people who are on warfarin don't really need it. They could either take another anti-clotting agent, or they just, they could eat a diet that's really high in salicylates, which have a platelet antagonizing effect. Helen, best foods to eat pre-workout and post. Yeah, so really it's all about carbohydrate and particularly low GI. So in terms of pre-workout, it depends on the duration of the exercise. If you're just going to do, a fairly brief workout, then a low GI fruit such as apples or citrus fruit would suffice. If you're going out to do an Iron Woman event, then you're going to want to get some lentils and some some rolled oats and other low glycemic index, slow burning carbohydrates on board. Oh, Helen's saying she trains in weightlifting. Yeah, so you do need to have carbohydrate sources that contain adequate protein, which fortunately just means eat whole foods. So for you, I'd go legumes. Eat more legumes. Okay. And that applies especially to afterward. Helen said, can you do a single list of recommended reads? Oh, gee, that's a good idea. So what you mean, Helen, is like get a maybe do a PDF listing the recommended books and maybe the websites too, and just send it out. Yeah, I can do that. I may not get to that tomorrow. I've got a pretty busy client day, but I'll send that out to everyone when I get that done. Thanks, great suggestion. Love it. John, alternatives do exist even for people, this is alternatives to warfarin, do exist even for people in their 90s who are told they're at risk of being a stroke. Yeah, they do exist. There are other newer anti-clotting agents. Yeah, okay, great. So I think that's the end of the questions. Teresa, I'm not sure what you wrote there. If there's anything you wanted to add, just message me again. I think the chat might have cut you off in mid-sentence. Okay, so cutting down from 10. Oh, yeah, okay, Teresa said great to get the list. Awesome, I'll do that. That's a great suggestion. Okay, thank you, everybody. Hope you got a lot of value out of this evening's presentation. Feel free to contact me if you have particular health issues you want to discuss on a one-to-one basis. All my details are up here, so you can get in touch with me and do that. And, yeah, love to see you at the live nutrition and cooking course starting this Saturday week, the 18th of October. Otherwise, feel free to grab that DVD and do feel free to share this presentation afterward. Okay, so all the best. Eat well, take care of yourselves, eat more plants, and bye for now.